You're listening to a Countout Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Ballot, the podcast where the conversation begins. I am your host, Ryan Knightsey, and today we're heading down south, depending where you're listening to this, I guess. We're heading down to Mexico, heading up, I don't know, heading over to Mexico for a different conversation. One of two wrestlers this season that we're talking, or I guess one of several wrestlers this season that we're talking about in the Mexico region, because on today's episode, we are talking about the tag team, the trio of Los Espantos. So I'm excited to talk about them. And joining me on this episode is first-time guest, American numbers, Arturo, all the way from, I don't know if I should say where you're from, but I don't know if you want that, but
Puerto Rico. So
all the way from Puerto Rico.
For me, it's like northwest a little bit, like
perfect. I don't want to give out your assassination coordinates. So
there we go.
But thank you so much for joining us, Arturo, on this episode talking about Los Espantos. Thank you for coming on.
Pleasure to be on. I mean, I think when I was asked, I was like, oh God. So like, and I say that because it's like it is one of the more complicated cases to discuss, I think, because of the way of the era. I mean, I think Ryan and I were talking about this beforehand, and Mexico, the complexity with Mexico is Mexico has some like eras where it's really, 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 really hot, but we don't have, because of things happening in that Mexico market, where like they're not on TV. So they're not on TV. And really what we have is reconstructed from newsreels, photos, logs of people who basically took the time to like save the carteleras, the big posters. Yeah. And then kind of like the oral histories from different people and like the movies, like the Santa movies, and like other luchador movies that are out there. And so like you're making this case for like a very, like, to be clear, a very important and very kind of like influential act, but you're doing it a lot. It's kind of funny. You're talking about like Los Espantos, the ghost, in like you're trying to like you're using shadows to figure out the case of the ghost. It's kind of like it is, but I mean, like it is kind of an interesting kind of conversation because it is reflective on a lot of the work that we have to do in other regions. Yeah. But in this particular case, it's a very fascinating kind of study because as I said, you have to kind of like go look at kind of the footprints in the sand, right? In a way.
Yes. And we talked about it we talked about it earlier, but we talked about it on a previous episode regarding Ted Boy in the same sort of sense that like there's like one match footage of Ted Boy, I believe, and it's from one of the movies that he did. Outside of that, you got nothing. And so everything else you're trying to figure out is sort of these shadows on the wall of like, okay, what kind of figure he was, how big of a figure he was, what does all these things mean? And even then, like at least with Espantos, we have some attendance data. With like Ted Boy, we have like nothing. So I mean,
I think some of that is also kind of the technique. I've actually done a lot of the work with some of the stuff with like Tarres in Mexico, in Spain, where like you can find things like the newsreel data, but you have to know where to look. So like there's like for example, like in this particular case that we're going to talk about, I know there's newsreel footage. I know of this because I've seen fragments of the newsreel footage from the areas, from talking to people. Like I actually literally talked to like El Hijo de Santos travel partner. He's one of the guys I've had on. And I was talking to him and I was like, yeah, like, so we know that like the newsreel, and we also see it from the films where like the newsreel is used and it exists. We don't have an archive of the newsreels to find it, but we know at the time it probably was captured and it was treated as something that was important in that. We have the magazines, at least in the Mexico case, as I mentioned, where like, and I said the magazines, like, and this happened in the US too, where like they used to do the picture magazines for all the big wrestling events were like a big deal for like boxing and for Lucha. And so you'd get these magazines that have like these really nice like color storietas, stories of the fights. And there's like, they used to do it for boxing, as I said, for like wrestling, and you'd get it for all the territories that you weren't involved in. But again, like in Mexico, because it was such a huge deal and it wasn't on TV because it was banned, not because people didn't want to see it, you like the magazines, Box and Lucha, are like huge deals, right? And so like thankfully people have collected a lot of these And like, there's people like, God bless the guys who are sitting online, like getting these magazines, like, and like doing the stories of the different matches. And like, they'll do like the voiceovers. It's freaking great. Like it's a fun thing to get into. Like, you're like, oh, man. But again, because again, also the pictures are like extremely good. There's some like some really good kind of like action photos going on. But again, you're kind of left with reconstructing the past in a way from like cave paintings in a way. It's kind of fascinating.
Yes, that is a lot of what the Hall of Fame is in a weird way. But yeah, I'm very excited to have you on. We're talking about Los Espantos today, the trio, Espanto 1, 2, and 3. We'll talk about a little of the history because, you know, as we sort of talked in the preview or pre conversation of this recording, is that like they are a very important team of the 60s in Mexico, but also in the same breath, because of what we're talking about of Reconstruction, I think there's a good amount of people that don't necessarily know who the Espantos are. So we'll talk about their history a little bit. But before we get to all of that, like I ask all of our guests here, Arturo, I'm going to ask you, and it's okay if you don't even have an answer to this, but I'm going to ask you, what is your connection with Los Espantos?
So, I mean, my connection, so my background is I'm from Puerto Rico, and I'm a big wrestling fan from Puerto Rico. And I say that Puerto Rican fans are a bit weird, at least from my era, because it's a very weird market in that we had a very global wrestling presence in the 80s in terms of like, it's a big territory. We had, so the main promotion is essentially more like what you'd see later, like it's a very outlaw kind of promotion, a lot of All Japan influence, a lot of luchador influence in the era before the tragic really end of the golden era, which was like the death of Bruce and Brody. Before that, in Puerto Rico, you had a lot of world wrestling would come over and like repeat angles and do all this stuff in Puerto Rico. So you'd have a lot of the All Japan office. I mean, Funk was booking it, and Funk was working Puerto Rico part time. Hansen would come over, like Baba would come over, like the young boys, like Great Muta was one of our young boys in Puerto Rico. And you'd get also people coming in from the office from EML, because again, EML and All Japan used to work together like a lot. So you get all this like very global work in PR, and it was a very broad way to kind of like view wrestling. So when I come into like wrestling as more, I guess I'm more of a historian now, because I am putting data together for the Hall of Fame. Even though I don't see myself that way, I try to put like Ryan and I mean, like the way I met Matt Bryan is like in different discords when I started putting together some like list of different historical artifacts from the different regions, because I'm very interested in seeing all these influences and seeing how it goes. And so my connection to Lucha is as I've gotten older, I've realized that Lucha is probably, or Lucha specifically the Mexico territory, is probably the most underrated of all the territories in terms of influence, because really it's the one where you see international cards. I can pull a card in Mexico up in the 30s, right? And see like the father of jiu-jitsu, like from Japan. I see like American wrestlers. I see like basically like the kind of cosmopolitan card that people say is weird. You see this in the Mexico territory, and you see how the influences kind of grow, and you see how the Mexican guys would go over and work in Texas and work in LA, and then LA is working with Japan, and then you see guys like Mill going up to New York. So there's all this like this cosmopolitan work going on in this territory. And it's a vibrant, successful territory from the 30s to today. I mean, like they're doing arenas in Mexico in all regions, basically nonstop for the last century, right? If you think about it. And really, that's kind of where you also, I mean, if you think about it, this is where Japan is sending people to school, right?
Still.
This is where like Naito's going to like learn a hold. This is like where people are going, like, and you're seeing these like custom built cathedrals, and there's like things like Arena, which is a throwback to like eras where like we used to have custom built arenas for wrestling in the States. But like if you think about the Olympic, which was the big one in one of the Olympic, which is what people don't know, that's the one in the Bugs Bunny cartoons and all the rest in all the boxing movies, is based on Arena, right? So Arena was built for like, so you have like this, well, actually like Olympic is before Arena, but like the kind of that global view of wrestling, my connection to the Espantos are really very much they're a iconic tag team and trios, right? in an era like they are outsized and influenced based on how much we have of the particular era, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So they're very much, I would say they're one of the most word of mouth acts because they exist in this very weird era because of the fact that Espanto 1 dies in 1968 tragically, right? Spoilers. but I mean, he essentially and they basically, the rest of the team kind of goes to the north part of Mexico, which is on TV. Like essentially they should have been this huge gigantic figure in the 70s era with UWA and the cross migration to Japan, which is where a lot of the Mexican wrestlers get a lot of their fame and the video and kind of the worldwide reach through that era in the 70s, where they work WWE and they work All Japan and they work like LA out of Hollywood. And so they influence every act that goes into that era, right? Yeah. And they influence like all the Lucha movies, because that's the other big thing, the Lucha movies, like, because essentially like Espanto is like a huge part of the Santos mythos. But because of him dying, right, and they kind of like step back and just go to the northern part of Mexico, they're lost because they're not in that era. So we know every bit of their influence, but we don't know them directly as much as we know all these other acts that worked with them and like built with them and came up with them because of the fact that they're isolated to that, like the dark era. Like really, it's a weird part because, as I said, like, and we'll get into it, but Mexico, Mexico debut, TV in Mexico kind of like starts in 1950, and by from 50 to 55, wrestling in Mexico is like the biggest thing on TV. Yep. Then 55, it gets banned because a kid dies doing a wrestling move, and there's like one of these moral panics, and so they take it off TV. And so from 55 to like the 80s, there's no wrestling on TV. And really, it's a bit of a, because by 62, 63, and this will come up later, we start getting the Mexican films. We have the books, the magazines, but we start getting the films, and then like we get the films with the luchadors and superheroes starting in like 62. And those are all kind of, because they're not on TV, like how are we going to get our luchadors? We get our luchadors on TV through the movies, right?
I don't think I've ever actually put those puzzle pieces together in my brain, and you saw on my face those neurons fire of like, yeah, that is why I think the movie.
Well, no, but like, look, if you listen to the interviews, the reason they were doing, like, so the reason the movies come about, right? The reason the movies come about, 58. So Santa does the first movie in 58. Well, actually, the first movie is Médico Asesino. So they do this movie that they wanted Santa to do, like, I think 56, 57. He didn't want to do it. They find a guy who's Médico Asesino, who they put the silver mask on. Médico Asesino becomes, like, a huge star off of this. Like, huge star? Like, Médico Asesino is, like, one of the biggest stars. He's, like, a huge star. He's becoming a huge star in the U.S. when he dies. He has cancer. So they're putting him on top in Texas. By the time he was a huge star, died of cancer, and then like he's like the first white wave. It's him and Enfermero and Santo are the first the trios like that. But they're not quite as coordinated as the Espantos are going to be. But you know, they're kind of the influence of that trios with Espantos is Médico Asesino, Enfermero, and Santo as the first trios. Big huge deal. The movies and so he becomes like a big TV star too. It's a whole thing. Like Médico Asesino has like this ballet, hot ballet. And like, there's this whole panic around his hot valet. You can't have the kids seeing the hot valet, so they switch him to like a male valet. It's a whole, and then like, so they're the big act in TV until the 50s. Then like when it's banned, then there's like a pay dispute with Santo, and Santo goes off and does the movie in Cuba. It's funny because that movie he does 2 movies in Cuba, and they literally finish filming the day Fidel Castro's marching into Havana, right? It's like there's a story about the producers having to escape with the film in like their pants, right? It's on the last plane out of Havana, and you're like, but those movies don't see the light of day until like 62, because essentially like by 62, Santo's getting older, and he's like, okay, so I need to start doing the movies, and this will come up and become important too. Santo's a heel, right? Yep. But he's not a heel in the comic books or the movies. Yep. He's like a superhero, like literally. What's the great quote for the first movie is like the mass wrestlers are citizens of the world, and it's their job to do justice everywhere, and so they cover their faces so that evil can't find them. I'm probably mangling this quote, but it's a famous quote from like the policeman saying, "Yes, son enmascarados, son ciudadanos del mundo." But it's so the movies are essentially kind of like how the older guys are getting older too, Blue Demon, Santo, and they need to have a way to make money and like get on in front of the public who wants to see them and get paid without having to deal with Lucha Roja and EMM. Like, so it's a whole thing about like, and then you see all these movies and you see like the IMDb, it's all the guys, it's like Shadow and Santo and all their kind of like their clique. And it's funny because it'll come up because Espanto's in a bunch of the early ones in extended segments. Because again, he's one of the guys they view as top guy.
Yep.
But we kind of got off topic and got a little bit like a little bit. Well, I mean, it's on topic, but I mean, essentially, they're essentially in that they're a key part of getting that movie launched because they're part of Santo's story, which we'll talk about. And they're also kind of one of the biggest money drawing acts for EMLO in the 60s, right? They're remembered as the top, not just the top tag team heels, but the top heels from like 61 to 68 is fair to say. They're like, given who they're working, it's fair to say that they're like the top heels in the promotion. And again, one of the points I was making to Ryan is the way I kind of view this historically is you have to view the promotion. Is this promotion influential? Yes, it's Mexico in the 60s. Is it drawing money? Yes, it's drawing money hand over fist.
Yeah. No TV, only movies.
Like, are the people influential? They're working with El Santo and Mil Máscaras. Yes. I mean, like
the biggest luchador, if not wrestler in the world.
I mean, essentially the way to kind of like one of the I was like looking at the key points and victories for Los Espantos, and we'll get that into that, but like,
of course,
it's going to be really key who they beat and who they're feuding with, right?
Yeah.
Like, who is this person they're feuding with? Oh my God. And once you kind of like, once you go through that, you start going like, oh, okay. I mean, like you can tell exactly. I mean, you can tell a good comparison would be how do these guys compare, like say the Paul Orndorff case, right? Think about the Paul Orndorff case, and a lot of Paul Orndorff cases, like he's working on top, drawing money with the biggest stars in that era everywhere, and he's not the tippy top guy, right?
Which I feel like Espantos as a group probably fit in that group.
I mean, like but like essentially they're working with the biggest money drawing star in the like Orndorff. He's working with the biggest money drawing star. Yeah. He's working in really important programs. The things he was doing tied into the story of everything else. So I mean, like it's kind of really important to keep that in mind.
The two things, because I think we should go into a little bit of their history. The brief history, which we talked about. Two things. One, buddy, I work in the film industry. How do we put together a movie called The Last Plane Out of Havana? And it's about the filming of that movie with Fidel Castro coming in, like a little secret agent type sort of film, sort of. I don't know. There's something there. There's something there that I think is a nice little thriller actiony sort of thing that could be fun. Just the vision, just this scene of people putting film strips down their pants, I think is very funny.
Well, I think the other real funny part about that movie is that movie's famous because supposedly Santos he works part of that movie without his mask.
Yeah,
like never been confirmed, but supposedly Santo is in that movie. Like it's part of the building the scene because they're talking about Los Enmascarados, and he's like he's playing as one of the supposedly. I don't want to make kayfabe of it. I don't want to be shoot trash, but he's supposedly playing one of the cops, right, of the background cops, and just smiling as the line is being said about like Ciudadanos del Mundo. Yeah, it's really funny to kind of think about it. But yeah, I mean, like that story is fascinating about like they're like the last thing done in Cuba in the last days of the revolution.
Yeah,
a little bit Godfather 2 for you.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story. I gotta look more into that. And then the other thing, going back to the Espantos, is that you talk about how we'll talk about their history. They're a very brief history. You talked about it. It's 61 to 68 is pretty much their time, and it ends tragically with the death of Espanto 1. We'll talk about that a little more. And this sort of sliding doors situation where if they didn't happen, they were set to go on a worldwide tour, obviously mostly Japan, but they were going to hit like Europe as well. And so a worldwide tour.
Yeah, I think, and that's covered in the Dave of it in Wrestling Observer. Give credit to Dave for Espanto Dos, and it's also like local bits. Yeah. And it's important. The reason that's important is 68. the first big Japanese tour for a Mexican star really is Mil Mascaras tour in '71.
Yeah,
it's funny because Mil is an important figure because Mil, like, this first big rival was Espanto Uno.
Yeah.
But these guys were going to be sent over to Japan like 3 years earlier.
Yeah.
Than Mil Mascaras on a big tour, and it's fascinating to think about how they would play out in Japan like coming in early for that big Lucha wave in Japan early, which, I mean, like, it took off. Like, Lucha was huge and is still huge in Japan from that era, and also how they would have played out for the EWA split, which comes in like a bit years later, because, and we'll mention this too, like, Luthez barely really loved these guys, and Luthez was a key figure in UWA. Right?
Worked them a couple times in Mexico. Yep.
Yeah. So they're essentially, again,
it's a massive what if.
We don't play the sliding what ifs, but I mean, like, we're really judging them for a 7-year period on top, right?
Yep.
And it is a 7-year period where at worst they're mid card. I mean, I went through all the cards in Lucha DB that we have, and they're like essentially from 61 to 68. They're like in half the cards that we have. Again, we don't have all the cards, but they're like in half the cards. Most of the cards that we have are all like Arena. So we don't have the Coliseo cards, but we know that they were on top in Coliseo for a very long time too.
Yep. They
had a streak at the start of the career for 34 weeks where they didn't lose in Coliseo. They were the top tag team there.
Yep.
So it's effective to say they were at worst middle of the card from 61 to 68, right?
Sure.
And at their peak,
tippy top.
At their peak. So if you go through, they've been doing aniversario shows at this point. They're like 92 aniversario, right? It's coming up this year. So 92 aniversario show. So the first double aniversario show was the 30th anniversary show in Mexico. I believe that is 62. And the first aniversario show, it's Espanto Dos working on top against Ruben, I think it's Juarez, right? I want to make sure. I do not want to get this wrong. It's
both of us frantically. Juarez, September 6, 1963. Juarez beat Espanto 2.
Right. So they've been working a feud with Juarez. Basically, Espanto wants to win. So they put that as the main event of the first night, the first anniversary, 30th anniversary. It's the first double anniversary show. The second anniversary show is Espanto Uno beats Juarez for the title and his hair, right? Yep. So they run, again, these are two sold out, and like it's described as a sellout to like the lights, basically like standing room only, not an extra soul could fit into any of these buildings. Yep. So the first time they run a double anniversary show, it's Espantos on top, and they win the second one, beating Juarez, Juarez was treated as like a big top star so people kind of understand, like, so the things they talk about in the obituary for Juarez is a 1,000-day title reign. He has a super long title reign where like he's the light national heavyweight title holder. And he loses this title. The end of the title reign is he loses to Espanto 1, right? In that match at the end of the 30th anniversary. So big, huge freaking deal. Like the guy they're painting as a star, who's been the main eventer, loses to Espanto Uno, right? Again, we're trying to get him over as like the big heel in the territory. Because this is leading to an Apuestas match, which really isn't Aniversario 3, but really is kind of Aniversario 3, which is the Espantos Santos Apuestas match, which we'll cover a bit later once we get into the history, right? So to give an idea, like at their peak, they're working essentially like a 3-night anniversary, like the first time they've ever done that, and they're all complete sellouts for the 30th anniversary. Yeah. So like CMLL thought, well, at the time, EMLL thought they were a big, huge deal. Like, yeah. Like at worst, this is basically like, Orndorff is kind of the example because working on top of Mania, right? So they're like, yes, this is our biggest event ever, and we're going to put Espantos on top, working on tippy top, right?
Yeah.
And we'll get into the historical angle, the Santos stuff. We'll get into like as we go through the case.
Yeah. So we've teased it enough times. Let's go through the history a little bit here. So the Espantos, born first Espanto Jose Vasquez Bernal, born in 1933. Second Espanto Fernando
Cisneros Carrillo.
I would have said the same exact way. Born in 1932 as well.
And then the baby brother who's born in, as I said, like we were talking about, like the good analogy is the Hart Foundation, where it's like, think of it as Brett, Jim Neidhart, and Owen, like the baby brother, who is Miguel Vasquez Bernal. And so the story is that Jose and Fernando were not brothers, but they met in second grade and they decided they were brothers to the point that like their
family members were like, hey,
the family, the
brothers.
parents considered them brothers essentially. Like it's like the best friends. They consider them brothers, and they came up. And like I think the important part also I mentioned is they're from what they call the Lagunera area, which is the north of Mexico, which is Torreon, around Monterrey, and it's I forget the other city. It's essentially it's like a big. There's the actual metro area in that area is about 2 million people, like 2.5 to 2 million people, and it's a big enough region that it essentially supports its own kind of wrestling territories around that, around Monterrey, because Monterrey is another big area, and also it's like just south of Texas, right? So there's a lot of crossover between the Lagunera, Torreon, Monterrey, and like El Paso. There's a lot of that, and again, important because we have important like the Guerreros from El Paso. There's a lot of important wrestling happening in that region. Comes up, so they're from that region of Mexico. They
born as hermanos from another madre.
Hermanos from another madre. They're like hermanos de crianza. So they were like guys who basically like decided, and so they fall out a little bit as they get into like their adulthood, but they meet back up as their Golden Glove. They were both Golden Glove boxers.
Yes.
But Espanto Dos was also kind of like a weightlifter. That is a very common thing for Lucha in that era. I think Rubén Juárez, we talked about, was also a weightlifter who kind of like came into wrestling. They would see these guys and people would go like, yes, you will scout. The story with Juárez was like his back manager decided to finance him because, hey, you look like a wrestler, so I'm going to finance you becoming a wrestler. So like you look at these guys, like the Mexican wrestlers like look like specimens back in the era, like they're big, impressive wrestlers. So they come up, they start working. And they start working in the local area in the north, right? As and different gimmicks. They're not in the Espanto gimmicks yet. They're working, I believe they're both like, I think one of them is working, there's like the Toro and the other one is Torbellino. Toro, Espanto Dos was Toro, which is like the bull, right? He's a big dude. If you see him, he's like a big dude. And the other one's like the Torbellino, which is like the hurricane. So he's the hurricane kind of gimmick. Also like big, which is again like very rudo.
He's the hurricane gimmick. He's a reporter by day, superhero by night.
Yes. And so like they both are kind of like they're being kind of groomed to being sent to like DF, which is Distrito Federal, the capital, which is called the Federal District, like the capital. So you work the Northern Territory. When you are good, right? They go like, okay, so we're calling you up to the capital. The biggest. So Espanto Uno goes in first, right? And he goes in as Espanto. He starts getting over 59 to like 61, but really he gets over when like Espanto Dos comes in, and they start as the tag team. So they're the big tag team in the second show. So the way Mexico, and then they still kind of work that way. They have the Martes show, which is the Tuesday show, and they have the Friday show. So they were working on top on the Tuesday show initially. And they beat everybody for like 34 weeks. Like
they made their debut January 24th, 1961, won a tag team tournament, and then went 34 weeks undefeated on Tuesday.
To give an idea, right? So there, and again, one of the problems we have for this, and this is one of the first ones, like the history of the Mexican tag team title is somewhat obscure in the era. Records weren't kept very thoroughly. So we know, because this is like said that they beat Blue Demon and Black Shadow. And Blue Demon and Black Shadow are like the biggest babyface tag team ever in Mexico, probably. I would argue ever is good. Ever's a good. They're Hermanos Shadow. They're like Black Shadow was like the biggest face in Mexico in the 50s. He loses this big apuestas match to Santo, who's a rudo at the time. Again, this will come up later. Yes. And this is arguably the biggest match in Latin American history where basically the story is Santo is coming in as a heel. He's working the biggest babyface in Mexico. Again, nobody expects Santo to win. He's working the biggest face in Mexican history. And so Shadow's the big star. Santo wins, and he wins the mask. And so Black Shadow has to unmask. And like Santo is so kind of mad that he goes to steal the mask from Shadow, which is like a super heel move. You're not supposed to do that. The ref is supposed to do that. And Blue Demon, who was Shadow's shoot brother, kayfabe, not shoot brother.
Correct.
comes in and is so enraged by Santo grabbing the mask that he flips from heel to face and punches Santo out, right? And this leads to the big feud. Blue Demon flips face and becomes the biggest face in Mexico.
Yep.
And it's like a big giant thing for like the next 40 years. Like it's like it is, guys, it is the feud. And I'm going into detail because this is the feud in Mexican wrestling. And the Espantos feud with Santo plays on this and really is the counterpoint to the biggest feud in the history of Mexican wrestling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in this feud, you're flipping Blue Demon from heel to face with a heel Santo, whereas the Espantos feud, you have heel Santo, and we need to flip him to be like the biggest face in the history of Mexican wrestling. Exactly. And the people we're doing it with are Los Espantos. And I was mentioning they're the tag team, and they beat Blue Demon and Black Shadow to win the heavyweight title, which is like, again, this is like beating like Hogan and Macho Man, right? It's like the biggest possible set of attractions we can beat. Yes, we're gonna beat those guys to become the champions, and so
which just adds more to establishing, and that's the other big thing to talk about here as well. This is all going towards establishing Los Espantos as a tippy top heel player almost immediately.
Right. Essentially, I think the other part, like in this era, which is again, like I mentioned this before, this is 61 to 68. This is after they're off TV, but this is also, Arena Mexico is fairly new in this era. So it's really being established as a money drawing kind of attraction. Like Santo had a pay dispute with the MLO in the late 50s, running theme with the MLO with people having pay disputes with them. And so like he's coming back, it's being painted like, and so like we're building this, like this is where you build Arena Mexico as Arena Mexico, right? And the team that the heels, essentially historically heels are the guys who are calling the matches or running the matches, right? So the biggest heels in this era, according to everyone, are the Espantos, right? So the biggest heels in the golden era of Mexican wrestling, right, or one of the golden eras, are the Espantos, right? And so like it's important that like they're working with like everyone who is a name in Mexico really is kind of working with them on top and working with them, and like really they're not being worked as jobbers because essentially like they're beating Blue Demon and Black Shadow. Then so after that, they start working as trios and tag teams with El Santo. So
El Santo's working with Corey Guerrero. Guerrero moves over to the US.
Guerrero's working out of LA. So like Santo, again, to give people kind of like the perspective, Santo, it has been the biggest heel star in Mexico for the past 20 years. This is, by the way, to give people an idea, Santo's like close to year 30. Like he's in his third decade. Like late part of his third decade in the 60s. He's been working. I mean, he started very young, but he's been working like a long time. Yeah. And he's like the gimmick is he was the holy man who's working like a Rudo and beating the crap out of people, which is gonna make all the Mexican fans really mad. But again, it's a little bit weird. Santo is the original tweener to me because he's working as a heel and working as a heel in the buildings, but a lot of his mythos is presented as face. And the key one is the comic books come out in 52, right? Comic books come out around the time he does that the Black Shadow feud when he beats Black Shadow. And in the comic books, he's Superman, like literally Superman. He is like the superhero fighting vampires and fighting monsters and fighting third communists and Nazis. That's what he's doing in the comic books. So all the kids love Santo, and you can kind of get away with it because they're not on TV from 55 to 62, but 62, and I was playing with Ryan, it's like this is when you get the movies in, so they really have to flip Santo face, right? Yes. So Santo, he's going to be a superhero in the movies, and he can't be a heel anymore, right? He has to. You can't. You can, but now you can't. It's much harder if you're presenting him as a heel in the stadium and a babyface in the movies too. So, given that they know that, they need to flip him. So they need a tag team. They put him with Los Espantos, and they start like the feared tag team of it, Los Espantos and El Santo, and Gladiador, who's another heel wrestler from the era, who comes up. He's the guy. He's with Espanto one the night he dies. He also dies too. And so they're working as the heel, and then like there's a match where I forget who they're working. They're working
Rayo de Jalisco, Rito Romero, and Henry Peluso. Peluso?
Rayo de Jalisco is one of the big. It's Rito Romero, Rayo de Jalisco, and Henry Peluso, and who's coming in for Felipe Hamley. So and I'm obviously reading that off. Jalisco was another big, huge babyface in the '60s, right?
Yeah.
So they're working this match and they lose it's a 2 out of 3 falls match and they lose. It's Espanto 1, Espanto 2, and El Santo.
June 22nd, 1962. For reference.
And they lose, and Espanto 2 starts beating the crap out of Santo.
Yep.
And when I say beating the crap, it's one of these like big bloody brawls. He tears the mask off. They both tear the mask off each other, blood all over. And I'll mention this. One of the things that's actually kind of important, and I want to kind of bring it up, is that the Espantos are also, they're not flyers. They're the first real, we mentioned Misioneros de la Muerte. They're the Rudos bloody trios trope namers. Right?
Yeah.
So if you watch Los Brazos in the 80s, or you watch Los Misioneros de la Muerte, or you watch one of these heel tags, or Los Satánicos, where like they're they're working, you're working stiff, punching, hitting against the rails, bumping all over the place, and like having these big bloody brawls. The guys who are having these big, famous, big bloody brawls to start with and trope naming in the Espantos, and we have some tape of this. Like there's there's a lovely line that the Mexican writers use, which they call it the mos carnesi. Carnesi is a very flowery way to say blood. The blood color, carnesi, which it's blood color, but using flower terminology for colors, right? So they call the fights the most carmesí matches of the era.
A beautiful bloody brawl.
Yes, they're calling them like very, very, very Art of the Blade. So they're saying like that the bloodiest matches of the 60s are the Espantos matches, particularly the Espantos match with El Santo, which is a famous bloody mask match.
Yeah.
Which, if you want to get an idea how that match played out, you can find Espanto Jr. and Santo Jr. kind of recreating some of that. But the point being that like they have the break feud, and then the big feud in the territory going through 30th anniversary and the unmasking of Espanto Uno is Santo versus Los Espantos. Santo flips babyface. He
flips babyface in a way that it's him not doing anything necessarily good. It's him getting the crap beaten out of him, pretty much.
Well, I mean, I'll mention that Santo is a very tweener because
I'm adding that to your point. Yeah.
The legend of Santo would be that like he's our heel. He's our thing that Christian is doing, that he's our babyface.
Yes.
Because when he first got big babyface pop, so he was working when he wins. I believe it's he wins the NWA light heavyweight title in this tournament against people from outside of Mexico. Mm-hmm. So like they're like initially booing him, but like when he's working against like gringos,
yes, he's our guy. He is.
Then the Mexican fans are like, no, he's our dude, right? So like he's Draymond Green to the Mexican fans.
Yeah, it's like when the World Cup at the Olympics, where it's like all these like team colors go away, and it's like no, it's now flag colors is what we're representing.
Yes, exactly. So he becomes, and again, there's a whole thing about tweener. There's a whole thing about tweener energy with El Santo, which is kind of funny that like Americans think they came up with a tweener thing, but like Santo was doing the tweener thing in the 50s, right? So, but they're really kind of like trying to set up the stark black and white and trying to make Santo the biggest baby face in the world, which is not hard to do, but they're using the Espantos to do it, to set them up as the biggest heels in the territory.
Yes.
And going forward,
they start feuding. This is also a point where Espanto 3 comes into the mix. You know, he's the younger brother of Espanto 1.
And now that we don't, and now he's a younger brother of Espanto 1. And now that the Owen, think of him as the Owen, right?
Yes.
So like, we need a guy now to work the trios matches, which are starting to become a big thing. Trios matches, not that they didn't happen, but they start becoming like a more top of the card thing in Mexico with them, which is a really big deal because they'll talk about, I mentioned like the golden era, silver era, like really, they say golden era is like this era, then the silver era is when the light heavyweights kind of like come on top a little bit more, and the bronze era is the trios, right? So they're kind of the trope of the trios and tag teams on top as drawing acts in Mexico, right?
What's the chicken egg situation here? Is trios wrestling becoming more popular around them, or is it becoming more popular through them?
I mean, I think some of the guys who were like Ethan Tyler was the one who drew the solid drawing case suggested today, was talking about like them being the originator for the trios, and I mentioned when I do the deep research, there's the original Ola Blanca, which is the first white wave, and the first white wave is in the 50s, and it's Santo, Enfermero, and Medico Asesino, because they all had the white masks, and they're all like medic gimmicks, and they're all like, it's white and silver. And it's a whole thing. It plays really well on TV. It's very like, it's black and white TV, so they're all dressed in white, working all the it's like, and so like, but they're also like, they're big rudos. Like, so Medico Asesino is a big dude beating up like tight, like it's a big dude beating tiny dudes, which is supposed to be a heel gimmick, but gets over as babyface. So like, it's Mexican, it's the beef thing, which still happens. Like, like we're like that. It's, I mean, Hogan was working in a way that like Santo would have completely recognized, because he is a babyface nominally, but he's working as a big guy tossing little dudes around, which the crowd freaking loves. So I mean, like, that was happening earlier, but like, really, the Espantos are the first kind of trios gimmick from the ground up, if that makes sense. So it's a trios act where like there's a famous photo of them, all three of them in their black tights with the white overalls and the mask. Kind of signing together and presenting as kind of like this united kind of aesthetically united kind of team, not like three gimmicks that look alike, but like one gimmick together. And obviously there's a hierarchy within the group, but it's important that it's the first cohesive trios and tag teams act. That makes sense. Because again, like, I can't say that the first big money drawing tag team, because that would be the Shadows probably, which are Blue Demon and Black Shadow, who were like, the story with them is they were in this battle royal, and they refused to fight each other when the last two landed, because we're brothers, and they weren't brothers, but they become Los Brothers Shadow. But it's not as packaged as what these guys are also doing. Like they're doing the team gimmicks, the team moves, and there's the famous like the trios kind of pinning thing, which like every single trios does after them. So they're kind of breaking new ground around them. And I can't say fully that they're completely unique in that, but they're unique in the presentation and being presented as the top act from the go, if that makes sense. And they're kind of, again, they're the first trios act presented at this level, right? And presented in this way, and working like nominally against like the biggest, the biggest act in Mexican wrestling. Like, they're working against like all these acts. So I think that historically it becomes important, because they show that you can draw on top with this, right? And it shows that it works. And it, like, to this day, we have acts that copy that. I mean, like, there's an Espanto working on Arena like Mexico shows like this week. I saw it. Like the new, they actually in it, they're working an Espantos gimmick combined with a Ola Blanca gimmick, which is like the black wave. So it's but it's kind of funny. Like, this is like how like relevant this is to like the modern day. And really, you kind of like look at Espanto gimmick. The Espanto Junior gimmick became the Pentagon Junior gimmick, which again we see where's Pentagon Junior now, right? So it's like we see the DNA of this going on through the ages. So really, it is an important gimmick, but. Going on, so they're working. They lose the tag team titles to Rayo de Jalisco and Santo, right? And then they're working trios matches against Blue. They actually beat Blue Demon, Santo, and a young boy Mil Mascaras, right? And the important part about the Mil Mascaras thing is the first title win for Mil Mascaras, who's arguably Mil Mascaras is probably, if we're arguing the top 4 acts in the history of wrestling in Lucha, he's on there. Like, it depends on what, like, if we're going worldwide, really, it's I would probably argue he's 2 behind Santo, and then Blue Demon, and probably Solitario 4, if I'm going in that order. And the first title feud, like, so he's working as a young boy in the trios feud against Los Espantos. Then his first big feud is beating Espanto for the national. Like, Espanto won after losing his mask to Santo, then wins the national heavyweight title and feuds with Mil Mascaras in his first title feud to set up Mil Mascaras as a big single star. So again, he's worked with Blue Demon and Black Shadow. They worked with Blue Demon and Black Shadow. They worked with, again, they're number 1 heels. They're working on top.
They are the group that turn Santo babyface, and then they're the group that helps establish Mil Mascaras.
Yes, and at the end, they were talking about being the guys who are going to go over to Japan. In 1968 to help set up Lucha in Japan, which is what Mill ends up doing 3 years later when he goes over. And there's like, Mill's working on top because like they love Mil Mascaras. If you've never seen Mil Mascaras in Japan, go watch one of those. Like the crowds just love Mil Mascaras, right?
Yeah.
Like he's working Baba and getting babyface cheers, like which is kind of wild. It's him and Dos.
I wonder if the Espanto gimmick would have worked too, because I wonder if they would have gotten cheered as well.
I mean, like cool heels that like toss little guys around. Yeah, I think that would have worked, and I suspect it would have worked. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like, so we got a little bit off topic. So again, like then they go after work. They're also working to win Juarez, who I mentioned at the time was the big champion in Mexico, being pushed as a big babyface too. He had a 1,000-day reign as light heavyweight national champion, which like culminated in a 2-day main in the 30th anniversary for EMLL, which he wins night 1 over Espanto 2, taking his mask, and then Espanto 1 beats him. Like, again, the way they do this is they have him beat Espanto 2, so you think that he's going to beat Espanto 1, then Espanto 1 beats him and ends the 3-year title reign, right? And then you think, oh man, he's going to beat Santo, because again, the thing about that is that match is kind of fascinating because so Santo's been there he's been working about 30 years or close to it by the time of the Espanto match, right? Santo's also going away to do movies. He's doing movies. You're pressing Espanto Uno as this big act, and this match is fascinating. There's this match. We actually have tape of this Espanto 1 and Santo match. I believe it's one of the first matches they cut into one of his films, and so they combined the newsreels and after the fact it's one of the first matches they showed, which is kind of like the way I kind of view it is one of the first matches that they show of El Santo in the movies is him and Espanto, right? Yes. And so it's cut into this film, and you can see it. You can see you see part of the 3 falls, and you see the actual last fall.
Yeah,
and so everything is set up. It's a 70-minute match, right? So like it's another legendary match. I would argue it's probably Santos' second most important match of his career. I would say like Black Shadow is probably 1, and this is obviously 2, because everyone like thinks, I mean, like everything is played out like he's going to lose. Like, so I believe Santo loses the first fall, he wins the second fall. I may have that backwards, but I know the third fall basically he cuts his front open, and as mentioned in Carmesí, because the shot is both of them are bleeding completely, and you can see it because like Espanto has like this white cross, so you can see the blood going to that. And Santos' silver mask isn't silver by the end of this match; it's red, right? So he bleeds so much that the entire mask is red, and so he gets Santo, like Espanto Uno gets him in the camel clutch with Espanto's finisher, right? Santos' finisher. So Santos like bleeding in the camel clutch. And is he going to tap? And he gets a miracle reversal, gets him. And this is actually on you see the end of it. Like when he gets him in that's in the newsreel footage. And I know it's real because like Espanto, like after he taps, he falls to the ground, right? And I know that you can tell it's the real shot because you can see the blood coming off his face as they pick him up, right? They pick him up from the ground, and you see the blood coming from his face because he wants to flip him over so they can see his face, because Espanto 3 is starting to cover up his face.
Yeah.
And Santos like there with like his blood. It's super famous match. And it's just like, and again, it's a complete sellout, obviously, like sets him up as, and again, from this, they're still heels. I mean, the even though he loses the mask, right, and there's revealed to be Espanto's brother, they still run back this later, and Santo is the national heavyweight title off this match, national light heavyweight, and then like Espanto wins that back from him, right?
Yeah.
Which I think the other match that they show, which is I believe it's called Santo versus Los Villanos del Mal, they actually show 7 minutes. They show 7 minutes of the match in that. I think they show the wrong finish, because in that one they show one of the ones where Santo wins, but Espanto wins the eventual like rubber match and gets the title back, right? So like again, he's getting wins over like Blue Demon, Black Shadow, Santo, clean wins. Like he's not like he's winning clean on these guys. And then obviously he has the feud with, and so like the end feud is having the feud with Mil Mascaras, as Mil Mascaras is coming up to be the next guy, and he's the first big title win for Mil Mascaras at the end, and then not quite there, but like within a period, he's teaming with Gladiador, who's another big name, another guy they teamed, And they go out that night. The story that Espanto Dos says that he got held back by a reporter who wanted to ask him questions.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't go out. And
before we get to the end bit here, I do want to interrupt and talk about one thing, because I think it's an important section to talk about here. We're talking about the history. We're talking about these peak periods of Espantos, and a lot of the names we're talking about here, that you're talking about here, is Espanto 1. We're talking about, Juarez beating Espanto 2 to win the mask. We're talking about then Espanto 1 winning the title and, winning hair as well off of Juarez. Then we had the Santo match, and it's all Espanto 1. And I do want to bring this up because it's an important aspect of all of these Hall of Fame discussions that we have, is how much, and Mexico is always a different thing, but I always want to bring it up as a question when it comes to tag teams, because it's always a conversation point that people have. How much of this do you give to the trio or even the tag team of Espantos? And how much of this are you just giving to Espanto 1? A lot of people like having hard delineations on these sort of tag teams. I'm the person that's like, if it's all part of the same feud, even if they're having singles matches within the same feud, it all counts. This whole Santo feud starts with Espantos beating the shit out of him.
Well, it starts with Espanto Dos beating the shit out of him.
Correct.
Which is
correct.
I think, okay, so when I initially was doing the case, like, to give the story, like, Ryan kind of reaches out. I start talking to Ethan. It's like, hey, because my first question to Ethan Tyler was like, hey, should it have been Espanto Uno, right? Because if you look at it, Espanto Uno
is the guy. If
Espanto Uno doesn't die in 68, I am 100% sure that Dave probably puts him in 96, right?
Like, sure.
I don't think the what if, but I don't think he even goes to vote. I think they, like, because again, if you project out who he's working with, his spot on the card, and kind of like how he's treated, like, he was treated as a really good worker too. Like, I've heard, like, he's one of the guys they call he's plastico. When, like, the Mexican guys say he's plastico, means he's like plastic man. He could just, and you see it. He's a bumping machine. He bends over. You see it, like, he's bumping like a madman for everyone, which is probably why the guys loved working with him, because he's a heel who gets heat and bumps for you. So loved working with him. But okay, so independent of that, we can't have that conversation. It's like a Dr. Wagner conversation with Cola Blanca, which, Dr. Wagner's in, of course. And Espanto 1, arguably, if we were having a conversation around Espanto 1, I'd say, he probably should be a Hall of Famer too. But the way they're presented and the way they're covered, essentially they're an act. Like, Espanto 3 is there at the match. Espanto 1 is there at the Apuestas match with Juarez. They're doing the feuds with Ola Blanca. They're doing the feud. Again, they're doing a feud with Ola Blanca that set them up. They're doing the feud with Mill and the other guys that are involved. So really, it is treated as an act.
Correct.
And I'm fine with that, because essentially they're working on top as an act. I think Espanto 3 is the one where, like, it's a little bit more. Espanto 3 is kind of like an addendum. He's a little bit like the JJ. He's JJ Dillon to JJ Dillon and Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, right? Whereas, like, I like JJ, but come on, man. But effectively, Espanto 3 is kind of like important because it's a unique part of, like, that being a trios thing. And I think that, like, whereas I would.
He helps add that historical significance.
Well, he helps them make because the fact they're a pioneering trios, and that's important because it's a little bit like the Mascarita Sagrada case, where, like, I'm like, Mascarita Sagrada is the first big money drawing, like, mini, right? And there's a lot of things with that case, but him being the pioneer and essentially really hit these guys being the pioneers. Now, I mentioned there's Santo, Enfermero, and Medico Asesino, right? Which was the first Ola Blanca, dovetails into the second Ola Blanca. But the presentation and how these guys are presented and how these guys work, I do think kind of puts me over the top and saying, like, I'm fine considering them as an act, because really the act is the story, right?
Especially, and you're talking specifically more about, like, this period as well. As this is all part of the act. All the Santos,
right?
Stuff, all part of the act.
Yeah, the Espantos are viewed as the heel. It's like the heel stable, effectively. It's like the heel act that's working against all these baby faces and being the key to all these cards, working on top of they're flexible because they're going to work at the trios, they can work the tag teams and that. And I mentioned the Hart Foundation analogy because, like, really, Espanto is treated as a mid-carder. Really, he is working kind of like high in the card. He is getting to the top where he's working. Yeah, he works the main event of an Aniversario show, right? So Espanto is a little bit more down the card. He's more like the lower. I mentioned like Blue Blazer Owen, like lower on the card Owen kind of deal, which is like, yeah, I mean, like that's, but I'm fine with treating them as an act and really kind of, it's effectively like, I mentioned the Hart Foundation analogy, but imagine the Hart Foundation have been working on top, right? For like
there was a part of me that thought about like, what about the NWO as an analogy? The three of the NWO, and I don't know if it works as well. That's what I'm trying to think. That's why I haven't said it yet.
I mean, like the thing about, again, I think because again, they're the money draw. This is the thing. Like we can prove by going to the records and seeing that, like, yeah, they're working on top on these Arena cards, on these Coliseo cards. They're working on top against like these money feuds against that. They're working on top,
basically.
Well, no, but here's the thing. They're winning feuds clean to El Santo. And they're winning feud clean to like Black Demon and Black Shadow. And they're being used as like the selling point for these cards, right? Yes. Particularly Espanto. Now, again, the argument where we want to split is, do we go to Espanto? Like, I don't think it's worthwhile to split it, really, right? Yeah. I'm comfortable enough with, and I think Ryan and I were talking about this beforehand. It's the way I judge this when I'm doing these cases, when I'm going to the region, is how influential and big is the act, but also how influential big is the era. Mm-hmm. And I think I would argue that Mexico in the 60s is one of the golden eras of wrestling, right? In terms of influence, in terms of like, we got the movies coming out. Like, I mean, this is the genesis of they're part of the genesis of like luchador films, right? Mm-hmm. They really are. They're part of the genesis of like the golden era, and like working with Santo and flipping Santo heel and working with all these guys. So like the era is extremely influential, and they're treated as the top heel act, and they're a drawing concern during that era. It's a short period, yes, but they're a drawing concern in that period, right? Yeah. And like, and not a small drawing concern. I'm talking like again, I mentioned the 30th anniversary, the first time they ran a double show, the Espantos were on top, right? Mm-hmm. And like at the second night, the act that was like having their hand raised was Espanto Uno, right? So the Espantos were triumphant at the end of the 30th anniversary show for MLO, which was a huge show for them, right? So in that era, that golden era, I mean, they were at the top or close to the top for that era. And I think the analogy is that 80s wrestling kind of era for WWE. And Orndorff is a good one. We're like, yeah, they're the main heel working in the very successful era for the main babyface, right? Mm-hmm. And for the main baby faces, because they go through different baby faces they're working. They work Juarez, they work Santo, they work Mil Máscaras, they work Blue Demon. So like they're working all these guys in that era. So I'm comfortable because of the historical significance, keeping them together as an act. I think in the what if scenario that Espanto 1 doesn't die, we probably have him, he's already in, and we're arguing about like, it's a little bit more like the Ola Blanca conversation, where like essentially the Ola Blanca conversation is, we're talking about Angel Blanco, right? We're talking about whether Angel Blanco and that feud and Solitario, and then again, that one gets a little bit more complicated because Solitario is part of that act, but he really isn't in the ballot, so it gets kind of complicated. I would say for the Espantos, it's a lot simpler because they're viewed as an act.
It's all part of this thing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like when you go to the historical retrospectives, they're viewed as an act, right?
Correct.
But again, like the Hart Foundation analogy, they're viewed as an act, but people recognize that Espanto Uno. No, Espanto Uno he's Brett, right? But they recognize that yes, we're viewing the act, but like there's different levels within it, but people view it as an act, a coherent act that was working on top of the card. Like they were working, as you're saying, they're part of the fuse. The entire it's not like other people are stepping in, but the Espantos themselves, the act is part of the feud that's throwing the money and kind of having the significance, right? They're the thing that people are copying when they get into the different trios like Los Brazos and whatnot. They're copying this aesthetic of like viewing together and working together.
Obviously they get to a point where Espanto 1 is unmasked, Espanto 2 then is unmasked as earlier with Santo. Was it Santo? I believe that unmasked him.
Espanto 2 is Ruben Juarez. Espanto 1 is,
and then 3 is
Santo, and I think it's 3 is Rayo.
3 is Ramirez, Ramirez.
Huracan Ramirez, yes, Huracan
Ramirez. So then they all get unmasked, and they all have their own. They're all going by their birth names, I guess, in a way. Vasquez Cisneros is the
Well, I mean, the covers say like, "Oh, muere Espanto," like Espanto dos dies, and they reveal, but they're still referred to as Espanto 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, they're still the Espantos. The names of the draw, man. The names are important, baby.
Exactly. So yeah,
like Satanico is still working as Satanico, man.
There's well, I don't know about working. I guess technically not anymore. By the time we record here, but sure. But yeah, so they're and even unmasking, they're still not. They don't really like drop down too much. They're still tippy top for the next several years up until what is 68? What happens in 1968? Do you want to divulge us on what happens there, or do you want me to take it through?
Yeah, take it through.
Yeah, so their run effectively ends in 1968. Espanto 1 and 2 have a match. They are wrestling Manolo Pullman and Carlos Mole, who are a team from Spain, I believe. Not as important, I guess, but night after they go, Espanto 1, the plan is also Espanto 2, and then Mistero Negro 2. Pape Franco is his real name, I guess. These guys all go to the brawl. They all go to a bar. Espanto 2 is supposed to join them. He gets held up behind. He has an interview with Boxy Lucha interview, I believe, is what he ends up having. Mm-hmm. He also goes back to his hotel to see his partner, I believe, is what it also was. So he gets separated.
I think that story is he was going to see his wife too. So he basically decides to take an early night because he's talking to a reporter. He says, "I'm just going to stick around." And the guys are going out to drink and play cards, essentially, which that is a very NBA story. We're going to drink and play cards. Somebody gets mad about it, and there's conflicting reports. Like a lot of time, the sensationalist media would blame him. But the stories that seem to have come out is that apparently, like the owner of the owner of the bar got mad, or one of the persons got mad, pulled out a gun and killed Espanto Uno and Gallador, which is like,
correct.
And so, which is it's a terrible tragedy. I mean, like there's we can get into the whole cursed wrestlers thing, but I mean, I think part of that is life on the road. I mean, these guys are like going out like and it is not an easy or danger or an easy life sometimes. They're doing a lot of traveling. So you get into these like situations. Where it gets relevant, I think, other than that, is like we talked about, like they were supposed to go on tour to Japan and Europe, and that got canceled. And really after this,
the team pretty much falls apart. Espanto 2 is really the driver there. He's just like, I don't really because think about it. I mean, again, Espanto 2, this is his essentially childhood mother from another madre. Like this is like a long time friend that has now tragically died that he fell in love with wrestling with. He's probably like, I can't do this right now, you know?
Well, I think it's a little bit more complex than that because they're all from Torreon, they're all from the north of Mexico, and from reading the local media on Espanto Dos when he died, like a lot of that, like descriptions is what really happens is they start, instead of working at the Distrito Federal in Mexico City, they go back to working in the north and they do work the north territories where you can like the north, like so people understand, like when you're working like Torreon and like Monterrey are huge cities, you can work Torreon and Monterrey on weekends and be drawing like 10,000, like you can be drawing like a full arena, and like they can just work weekends. He owned a bunch of businesses supposedly too, so he was married, he had businesses, so he was better off just staying in the region. And he worked through the late 70s, right? So I think his last match is Gran Hamada in 79.
Yes.
But they're working, it's like going back to Calgary if Calgary was like hot, right? So they're going back to like the north of Mexico where they're very successful. They're working like at a very high level in terms of drawing, but they're just not like interested in coming back and working. Like after that, they're really not interested in working on top in CMLL, right? That's kind of like what happens.
And that's
so it's not a situation where like they're not relevant or working. It's just like they're not interested in being a money drawing concern in Mexico City. It's a way to kind of like phrase it.
I think that's good, and that's also where like the helpfulness of Espanto 3 comes in, because that's where the act continues. Yeah. They continue working as a duo all the way up until 79. They even win tag championships at some point during this run here. So they are, the act is still continuing. It is just sort of taking, I guess, sort of a backseat to a degree in terms of like the Mexican stage, in terms of, Mexico City and all these sort of things, but there's still a massive aspect in terms of Mexico.
Yeah, they basically become a lot more. They basically just go back to the region. It's kind of but again, I want to couch it, because when I say like going back to a region in Mexico in this era is not like, say, I'm going to work like Michinoku Pro. No, guys.
Yeah.
No. They're still working. Like
they're still working not tens of thousands, but thousands upon thousands of people.
Yeah, they're still going. They can still go off and make a really decent living and work on that. But I mean, like, they don't. Again, like if you had an experience like that where like your brother and best friend died on the road, then you might I can understand why they would say, you know what, we're just going to go back with my family and work and still work in the region. And I think that, like, but again, like, the what if is really they kind of choose to step back as opposed to kind of like
they were on the precipice of breaking out most likely on the worldwide stage.
I mean, I think
instead they, because of what happened, because of the circumstances, they took a step back.
So if we look at the people they were working with, right? So they're working with Mil, they're working with obviously Santo, they're working with Rey Jalisco, they're working with Ruben Juarez. They're working
when Luthez comes to town, they're working him.
Yeah, like we mentioned that. Like, so Luthez, when Luthez comes to Mexico in that era and he's working tag teams, he's working against Los Espantos. He's the team he picks to work is Los Espantos, and
not every night, but I think two.
Yeah, but like, he's working on top of them, and like, so
and Friday show, I believe, is
right. And Thez is still a big deal to the point where like he wins the inaugural EWA title in the 70s, right? Yeah. So like he's a big deal in Mexico. So like there's every reason to think that they would have been in the spots in LA, and they would have been in the spots in El Paso, and they would have been in the spots in Japan. That a lot of the people who were working with them, who loved working with them by all accounts, were in. So really, I suspect that they really probably would have been one of the acts that would have been like played in Hollywood and played in, and they would have, again, I think the what if is, I think if Espanto 1 doesn't die, I think it's, we can, we again, as I said, we probably get him in 96 because he would have been enough of a name outside of that 7-year period in other big money drawing territories that this would be kind of like, this would be academic, but we don't have that. So we really just have to focus on the goal. But again, the kind of like, again, that 7-year run,
they're mid 30s at this point too, by the way, when I think 35 is when Espanto 1 dies. So it's like their prime of their careers. They're
right. For Lucha, like
for Lucha, that's also different, but
I mean, like they would have been on top throughout the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And there was enough. Here's the thing, in that era, if you're imagining a luchador in their slot, right? Luchadors in the slot in that era going to the 70s can then get like an explosion of places they can work, because they can work EMLL, they can work out of NWA Hollywood, they can get gigs in All Japan, and they can also work UWA, right?
Yep.
So they would have had and they would have been in demand. I mean, if you're trying to get Misioneros de la Muerte started in the 70s, right? And Los Brazos started in the 70s, like it's an easy enough thing to, like, if Espantos are able to call up and like, hey, we want to have a feud with you guys.
Yes.
Because I'm sure, because again, Mexican promoters are very simple. If we can draw money with it, we're going to book it. Somebody would have booked this stuff. And I feel like, that's kind of, again, we're spending time on the what if, but I want to like couch it historically so people understand. Yeah. We know the people who were in this role and we know what they did. Essentially, like, the way to kind of see it is Ola Blanca, right? Which is Dr. Wagner and Angel Blanco, and I'm forgetting the other one. I can't believe I'm blanking on Ola Blanca, but effectively Ola Blanca, who were like basically, and then Solitario is the original kind of person in that. It's like these guys are all Hall of Famers, and they're a slot below these guys on the card, right?
Yes,
really, and essentially they kind of come up to replace them when they kind of like go away. That's kind of like where they have the heel turn, where they beat the crap out of Solitario. I forget which year they beat the crap out of Solitario. It's like, I'm sure it's like not the only one, but like, but effectively the way to kind of view it is guys who were below them on the card are Hall of Famers, right?
Yes.
So
from this hot period.
Right? So again, we're projecting, but like really, if you slot them and you view the guys who were kind of there, I mean, like I would say, like maybe Juarez is probably below them because he's like less profile. He got on the ballot, didn't get on. I may have a problem with that. I would probably think that Juarez and Garza should have been on the ballot, but that's a whole separate discussion. but effectively, I would say that like they're very much a Hall of Fame tag team to me, right?
Yeah.
Based on the placement.
I think that's it for the history of the group. So I think we'll start breaking down each sort of category as it pertains to the Hall of Fame. Of course, if you've listened to these shows before, if you've listened to Hall of Fame audio in any context before, you probably understand the rules. But if not, basically, there are sort of three main criteria that Dave Meltzer wants us to look into. And that's sort of the working ability, the drawing power, and the historical significance in a positive manner when it comes to these acts. They don't necessarily have to be Hall of Fame great in all three categories. I think Dave basically says at least two of the three, or so great in one that they are worthy of inclusion. So let's break that down a little bit here when it comes to Los Espantos. And we'll start off with working ability like we always do. And this one, kind of a short conversation probably, because the big thing here is that there is, as far as I know, and I think you can agree here, Arturo, zero footage available to us to the normal public. As we stated before, there is footage of El Santo and Espanto one wrestling in one of Espanto's movies. The Spectre of the Strangler is what the movie was.
There's the Spectre of the Strangler and Santo versus the Ring of Villains, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So there's the first one is this cut newsreel with like stage footage of them, their apuestas match, and then the second one is one of their title matches they were doing around the loop, I think, because again I'm reconstructing it from seeing that one's a longer segment. It's like 7 minutes of them doing.
Yeah, I know the movie one is at least on YouTube. I've seen that one. But
so
both of these, all in all, both of these are just Espanto one. We don't have any footage of them as a duo, as a trio in any capacity.
Yeah, and so I interviewed the traveling partner of Santo Jr., Hijo de Santo, Orlando. So hello, Orlando, if you're listening. And he talked about him being like considered like Espanto Uno, considered a plastic man, like one of the guys who can like sell really well, sell bumps really well. You can kind of see it on the tape where he does that. Espanto 2 was also like, supposedly Espanto 2 was the better worker of the two, and Espanto 1 is considered like a good worker, but Espanto 2 was also like a really good worker too for the era. So they're both considered good workers. For Espanto 3s, I have no testimonials other than like he's put on that. I would say that given the, I mentioned this because he's also working on top. One of the things that happens is like, in that era, if you're working on top with all the faces, they all have to like working with you. So that implies that he was like, it's the Randy Orton test. They all like working with him, right?
Sure. Sure.
And again, I think I'm a big believer, like if you know, if you can draw money on top and they consistently put you on top of that, and like, you know, everyone speaks of them being a very good worker for the era. And again, we obviously know a lot of people kind of copy what they were doing. I would rate them probably as good, right? So it's like
at minimum.
Yeah, I would say like this is the old Lismark, another one of the guys, like, you know, he does a Lismark scale where like if you get a 9, like with 1 to 9 in each category, if you get a 9, you're like one of the top 5 workers in the world. Like Samoa Joe would get that at one point. I would say they're probably like a 6 or 7, probably. I think because they're kind of unique, and I think a lot of like I've seen. But again, I'm going by film. I'm going by tape. I'm going by like some of the trios move and like the historical. So it's hard for me to rate them any higher. I think they probably are better workers than I'm rating them at based on that. But I'm not going to give them more credit than I can. Yeah. It's kind of like I can't judge something that I don't know, but I can say that like based on testimonials, they're like, I would say probably 6. Probably lean towards 7 in that scale. Go ahead.
The only other thing I found like as a quote was, and it's coming from Espanto too, so I guess it's secondhand. There was a magazine interview where he talked about how one of his proudest moments as a wrestler was when Lou Thez told reporters that he had great qualities and a good wrestling base.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the point being that like when they're trusting you in that spot, right? So when Mill, as a junior, is getting all these spots against those Espantos, it tells you the promotion trusts them to protect him and make him look good, right?
Yes.
So
if they're bringing you over to Japan to, I would assume, work Baba, they probably
Yeah.
probably are good enough workers that we can trust.
Right. But again, the fact that Thez likes him means Thez is also kind of involved with the All Japan stuff. So I suspect that that's the connection too there.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I would love to ask Dave about that, the sourcing on that story, because maybe it was Thez is the sourcing on that story. We don't know.
Yeah.
Thez, but for people who don't know, Thez was actually fairly active, even into his older years on the boards and stuff. So surprisingly, having conversations with Tony Khan and people online.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. But I would say that everything points to them being very trusted and very well respected within the community, and also they trust them in spots to put people over. And again, look at the evidence. The people who worked with them, did they get over? Yes, they totally did. So what they were doing was hitting with the audiences, and the work that they was doing was getting the people they were working with over, right?
Yeah. And not just getting them over, but establishing them, establishing Santo as a face, establishing Mascaras. These are important things. We talked about this off air. You talked about Mercedes Moné, Stephanie Vaquer match being an important thing. That's a match that ultimately establishes Vaquer on the U.S. American
right. And I say that that's an ongoing argument as to whether Io Shirai or Monet is a better worker. And my take is that Monet is a better worker than Io, because even though Io is probably more technically proficient, I feel that Monet is much better at Monet got good matches out of Carmella, right? Because Monet is this is true. You can go look at these matches exist on tape. I've seen them, because she's very good at understanding the level of worker she's working with and setting up a showcase to make this person look as good as they can and working the audience reaction to get there. Whereas Io does the thing where Joshi workers do this, which is when they're working with somebody they consider unsafe, they slow it down to work safely. So they work at 25% or 30% speed. And you kind of to get an idea what I mean by this, watch watch Riho work against somebody who's not a good worker, and she's working so slow. And Io does the same thing. And I think that there's a slight difference, and there's that peak historical level is being a worker that can figure out how to get the maximum out of your opponent, right?
Yeah. Monet is working at them at their level to the point where it can work as a entire presentation.
And I think the argument I'm making here a little bit with Los Espantos is the promotion trusted them with valuable equity, or guys that they saw future equity with. They're working La Blanca when they were coming up. They're working with Dr. Wagner and Ana de Oro. They're working Solitario. They're working Rey de Jalisco. They're working Mil. They're working the older vets. And again, as I mentioned, Blue Demon and Santo are both banged up and old in this era, based from what they say. Part of the reason they went to do the movies in this era, because they were banged up and they couldn't work for time. So they needed something to draw money while they were kind of resting. So they were trusted to work with the older vets safely too, right? So they're kind of this in this spot where there's two things happening. There's the older workers and the younger workers, so they're trusted to work safely. And it feels like I'm making the Randy Orton argument, but it's imagine
he's on the ballot. He's on the ballot still.
Imagine Randy Orton, but he was actually drawing money. People are gonna get mad at me for that, but seriously, they were trusted on top. But we demonstrably know that these were money drawing acts.
On top. I would say consistently on top. Randy Orton has peaks and valleys constantly.
Right, and there's arguments around whether or not it actually he really is a draw when they put him in the spot. Where there's no argument with these guys when they put in the spot that they do money, right? So
so let's talk about drawing power, because that's the next big thing. These are guys that are always at the top of the cards for practically 7-8 years. I see Santo and Espanto won mask versus mask match had an attendance of 18,000. If you want to throw some figures at there, reportedly. So it's these are guys who are going down to Torian. They're working 10,000 arenas or whatever.
Yeah, I'm gonna say look, based on we know that they were drawing full houses at Arena and Coliseo. We know they were working on top at the biggest events in the history of VML to the time, right?
Yeah. They start on Tuesdays, then skip Saturdays and go straight to Friday.
Yeah, they're just we got to move it. And again, they go from Tuesdays to working with El Santo, to feuding with El Santo, to working on top at the 30th anniversary show, which they made 2 nights, which had never been 2 nights before. So they do 2-night show. like first like 2-night mania, or like effectively it's like a first 2-night mania, and it's built around them, right?
Yeah.
So are they a money drawing concern? I can't rate them lower than, like, I'm going like from a scale 1 to 9.
Sure.
I'd probably lean towards 9. Maybe I can't go lower than 8, right?
Sure.
I go 8 if I say, okay, they're like getting a lot of shine off El Santo, but that doesn't really kind of hold because they're drawing the houses with Juarez, right? Not Santo. And they are drawing the house with Santo after, but they draw 2 houses without him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they still draw houses without him working with like different accents. They draw the houses when they're working Mill, when Mill really wasn't the concern. So like, or like he still wasn't like the second biggest star in Mexico. So, I mean, 8 or 9, really. And again, this is not happening in a low tier era. This is happening like
peak era.
I mean, we can argue about the length. Maybe I go 8. Like, do people understand?
I think 8 makes sense to a degree, because I think there is the longevity of a thing, and the longevity is obviously simply because Espanto 1 dies. And then we have lesser records, I guess, when it comes to.
But how much credit do we give them for helping Santo flip his face completely and helping him with launching the movies? Because like that's an important component in him being like a straight up baby face, because I remember like before that he's kind of a tweener, right? Sure. So it helps set up the persona of El Santo movie star, right?
I mean, I would put that more in like historical significance, as like it's them as an act that help establish Santo as I wouldn't give him like drawing bonus points for Santo being
it's
a
like
big star.
Maybe we go historical. I would say like, and again, so people understand that like you essentially look at all these points and you say like, how high does he rate to the rest of the category? Yeah. And like, are they worthy Hall of Famers? And I'd say like, look, if I'm rating them, like 9 would be like Hulk Hogan's a 9, Kanek is a 9, right? Like Inoki's a 9, right? Santos a 9, Blue Demon's a 9. I'd say these guys are probably 8. I mean, And again, I think partly because of length, partly because of kind of like the era. I can't go 7, right? I'm like Becky. I would say Becky Lynch is like a 7. Like no, I got to go a little bit higher than that. I got to go like. I just feel like essentially based on the era, based on who they're working with, based on the draws, and how the promotion is like, let's just run a second house for like Aniversario. And like okay, I'm listening to you, Salvador Luterov. 8. Right. Yes.
Yeah. And look, and to do a brief detour here, the conversation is as well as like people look at longevity, and it's always a conversation. Obviously, there's longevity on top. These guys have it. I think like 8 years. Basically, you're talking longevity on top from the beginning to the end. It's basically, you could say maybe 7. There's probably like a 7.5 or something, but like an 8 there, right? It is a short period. That's probably the length that some people would hit, like what you would need for some people. I know some people talk about 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, all these sort of things. That's around the length that people have. Maybe you can throw in, maybe let's just like round up the rest of like the Torian of Espanto 1 gone and like wrap that up as like another bonus year or something as a
they're essentially like running more like a local territory kind of presence in that where like I think that like I wouldn't count that. I'm counting that.
I would give them like maybe 1 year as like a whole roundup and just say
and I think one of the things from like and I think that in the analysis that Ethan was doing for the cards, one thing I don't think he figured in, and I think people figure that in, is 68 like they're not as much in 68, but here's the thing: 68 was the Olympics in Mexico, so they didn't have access to arena necessarily. So a lot of the I think part of the reason probably right they were playing like a tour was because of that. 68 is a weird year. They're like, let's get some of these guys elsewhere because we can't draw money as much locally because the buildings are kind of like, again, it's the Olympics. And I think it's like it's a period where like people do need to like maybe go off and do some other things in terms of that. So it's not necessarily them, it's just kind of the relationship like all around, right? But again, like some of that is because it gets cut off there. We don't know what it would have been like 69-7, and we can speculate. We think it probably would have been good, but like we don't know.
There also could have been like, outside of like the obviously depth of the Espanto 1, there also could have been a situation, and that's the what if of it all. There could have been a situation where like someone gets injured and just like they come back and just doesn't work as well, or things change. You know what I'm saying? Like things could change. Who knows?
To me, like if the key angle of your run, right, is in the first paragraph of like probably first or second paragraph of Santos' career, feuds, can't rate you lower than an 8. Like I'd
Yeah.
say if I'm looking at El Santo, what am I talking about? Or like if I'm talking about the feuds for El Santo, I'm talking about Santo and Black Shadow with him as the Rudo and Blue Demon, him and the Espantos, and probably him and Perro is probably the other one I would talk about, right? And there's others, but I think these would be kind of like Santo young, Santo like prime, getting old, getting towards the movies, and then like the twilight, which would be the Perro Aguayo feud in the like 70s, 80s. And those are like, and this is like Santo has a shit ton of feuds, but don't get me wrong. But even the historians, when you look at the Spanish historians, that's they talk about the mask and the apuestas matches and the most legendary feuds. Like the one match they think that like historically like is that match with Espantos, the Espanto Uno, where like they think he's going to lose in that 70-minute match. It's really kind of key, right? And I can't go lower than. You know, it's again. I come back to the Orndorff thing. It's like I can't go lower than this because look. I can't look. I can't.
Yeah. There's
it's just not
enough.
reasonable. It's just not reasonable for me to go lower because, like, you know, and it's also not a down period, right? Like, I've heard Joe Lance talk about the tallest midget, and no, this is not that era. This is an era where, like, look, it's big business. It's considered a golden era, and they're a big money drawing concern in it. So yeah, I mean, gotta go with that.
I mean, look, hey, if anything, we're talking about the gold period of the '60s. Hey, coincidentally, things start. You know, the gold period. Well, again, they're at 68, and they're gone basically as an act. So
but
maybe
they're figured in flipping Santo face, the biggest star in the history of Lucha. So I mean, and not just figured in, but like
they are
they are
they are the engine basically.
They're the engine. That's how, like, and again, somebody else could have been put on the role maybe, but like, I mean, they're the ones who are put there and used in that capacity, right? Yeah. And so that has to be figured into the equation.
Historical significance. I mean, we basically have been talking.
I mean, we just covered. I mean, again, how do I put this? I mean, I can't go. The lowest I could ever go is 8. I probably have to go at 9, and let me kind of walk through that. I mean, again, they're second or first biggest feud for Santo, most important feud for flipping him face.
Establishment for Mascaras.
It's establishment for Mascaras. They're also kind of the trope trios. And again, here's the thing: not just the trope trios, but the trope heel bloody trios. Like they work Rudo. From every account, they're like, every match is like, yeah, they broke him open and he's bleeding over the mask and there's blood all over the ring. And the Karma C statement. They're the Karma C Rudos, right? And if you're familiar with Los Brazos, right, and you're familiar with like Misioneros de la Muerte, and you're familiar with all like the top heels, like the top heel trio stable, that's how they work, right? That style of like, it's not like people think Lucha and they think that luchador like flyer style, which is really actually like that's Black Shadow style. He's the guy who started that, but these guys, and he also sounds like kind of worked that too. But these guys are the Rudos beat you up, bleed, bump style, right? And it's again like the prototypical match is that they call the bloodiest match of the '60s, him and like and Santo. And again, if you look at the match with Juarez to give Espanto to his shine, that match with Juarez was like the movie idol looks, right? He's like the handsome, super handsome guy. They're pushed as like the top face, and Espanto breaks him open, right? Just completely beats him to a pulp. It looks like an assassination. Like that match, if you get the stills, like Espanto has like, it's really cool. He has like this jagged scar on the cross, the white cross on the mask. So he's holding Juarez, who's bleeding, and he's bleeding through the mask. Like you can tell he's setting that up for the photo, and the photo is just like, and like they just like, again, Espanto was a really good worker, but like they knew how to like make these like iconic kind of figures. And again, they worked with La Ola Blanca as they were coming up. One thing I didn't mention was like I mentioned Solitario a little bit, but Solitario was set up as a face by being in a trios with Angel Blanco and Dr. Wagner as Ola Blanca Dos. He a big heels trio. They betray him after a loss, beat the crap after Solitario, and off to the races we go, money drawing, and that is exactly the Santo and Espantos angle just replayed. You know, like again, but here's the thing: like that trio's betrayal is kind of a trope starter, right? So like they're trope starter as like trios. Package trios with like the uniforms, they're trope kind of like for that betrayal was things that like they would keep stealing. That style of being like the trios heel that beats up people and throws people around and bleeds and bumps with them is a style. So I'm close to a 9 on them, right?
Yeah.
And I'm talking myself into a 9. Like, well, I would say like they're not as significant, possibly because of the fact like you get into Espanto 3 because the way the package is presented. Maybe I bumped down to an 8 because of that, right?
Sure. Yeah,
but being considered still to this day one of the top 5 tag teams in the history of Mexican Lucha, being kind of the initiator of that trope, being initiator of that, like it's not that there other people didn't work that, but that level of high profile bleeding match with El Santo, that's like that match and that bloody 70-minute battle with Santo is an important kind of influential style of match, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like you can find other kind of that, but like that image of El Santo with the blood, well, like as I said, like the Mexican writer said, the carmesí, the bloody red mask in his face, right? And he's holding the other bloody man. He's pulling Espanto, who's bleeding. Literally, when he pulls him up, Espanto, and you see the blood rolling off his face. And again, it's on tape. You can see the blood dripping off his face to the canvas. Right? That's how you know it's the live match, not the recreation. Because you can see the blood, like as Santo picks him up, and that kind of image, right, at that level, right. And again, in the highest possible, again, they also do it in the Aniversario, is a very important trope for, like, again, think about the Mystico MJF match, right?
Yeah.
And think about the impactful bloody mask of Mystico. That's calling back to that Santo match, right? Like the golden mask, like the silver mask with the blood, right? And again, Hijo del Santo does it in his first big famous Apuestas match with Espanto Jr., right? They do that match. And again, it's the same thing, bloody mask. And like they're calling back to that image. That is kind of an
all-timer image in Lucha.
That's like a cave painting image for wrestling and Lucha. So really I have to probably, no, seriously, it's a kind of picture that like launches 1,000 ships that everybody kind of like goes off on. So at worst, I go with, again, I'm going the scale from 1 to 9. I'm gonna go with a 9 on this. I could go as low as 8, but at this point, we're like 6, 8, 8. You know what? I mean, like, this is the kind of score you get when you're like, this is better than the score I gave Orndorff, probably. And I thought Orndorff was like a no-brainer Hall of Famer.
I want to ask this because I think this is another aspect to be the devil's advocate in terms of the historical significance. We're talking about these guys as massive stars of the 60s. Lucha World did a listing of the top greatest tag teams in Lucha Libre history. They rank number 6 of all time, according to Lucha World, that publication. But we both also felt the need to go into the history of this team, and I laid it out as like, I think because there's a good amount of people that do not know who these people are. Do you think that is just simply the lack of education on Lucha Libre history due to its many different factors and bring it over to the American audience? Or do you think that says something about their level of significance in Lucha Libre?
I think that the fact that they're able to get to 6 with essentially this team being relegated to word of mouth, right? I think this is an important point. Like, they're in their era is the exact window where they're the most handicapped by not being on TV because TV went off in 55, by not being big in the films, because even though Espanto does figure into, like, really as much as anybody in the early films, he figures in because Santo knows he's like, he's my big rival, right?
Yeah.
But once he dies, you can't book him on the he can't show up. But like, again, like he probably shows up, like if you look at the guys who showed up like he did, he probably shows up in like 25 films. If, like, because Black Shadow and all these guys show up. Yeah. And so he probably would have been like a lot more prevalent. So, and he doesn't get to, we're going to tape him for TV in Japan, which if he'd gone to Japan, like both of them, like the Espantos would have gone to Japan, they would have been all over All Japan TV and they would have been all over the shows like Neil and Dos Caras and all these guys are.
Footage would have also then gotten to America.
They would have gone to LA. They would have worked out of the Hollywood territory, which people don't know, but the Hollywood territory was like huge. Yeah. It was all over the TV in LA. And so effectively they're doing a lot of this influence simply on the news, the stories of the people being in the arena,
Mhm.
the people who talked about them, and kind of the newsreels and kind of like the magazines, right? So they're essentially they're doing the significance in the hardest with the most possible obstacles against them, other than somebody being from like the 30s or 40s, right?
Sure.
And I think that has to kind of figure into the conversation, because even with all these factors going against them, right?
Mhm.
And even with a very short window, they're still kind of going like, no, yeah, these guys, they were extremely influential and extremely kind of important. And they still produced iconic feuds and iconic moments, even with all these limitations. And I think that has to be figured in, right? There's resonance to these guys, even with all the limiting factors.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. They are a team that packed a massive punch in the incredibly short span of their window, as a pure trio, I guess. Pretty duo trio, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we can have an argument. We can have an argument about like whether. I mean, I don't even know if the trio. I mean, again, I understand putting in the trios because they did draw as a trio, and I understand putting in the trios because they are, as I mentioned, they are the trio.
Yeah,
that
adds
trio
to the significance a little bit. It also adds a little bit of that drawing longevity working stuff of like they continue to work until the late 70s.
Yeah, so the people understand, like, the trios become like the big money drawing thing in Mexico in the late 70s and the early 80s, and to this day, like trios are a huge thing in Mexico. And really these are the first like on top drawing concern act. And also, again, like packaged as like I can't find an earlier kind of like design and package act like these guys. After these guys,
first major, we'll say.
I mean, I can't find one that does the same like to this level where everything like the twin magic kind of like like nobody else I can find that's doing that. It's something that happens a lot more after Villanos, and like there's medicos everywhere, medicos and medicos and medicos. And again, there are, I mentioned La Primera Ola Blanca, which is Santo, Médico Asesino, and Enfermero, who are really kind of the first big like act like that. And obviously with Santo and Enfermero and Médico Asesino, who are like all, I mean, Enfermero is in the Hall of Fame. He's the only one not there. It's a weird kind of omission because again, he's kind of like the Espanto 3 of that act. But again, like the other two are huge Hall of Famers and really kind of important, but really kind of the first replication and purpose package, not just like built together, but like, oh, we're gonna do this like this and it's gonna work, right? Really kind of like I like the Heart for Nature analogy. Just really works for them because like really even like down to like the color. If you think about how the Hearts presented themselves, like in terms like the coloring, it is kind of funny that the presentation does kind of align too, because they're doing instead of doing black and white, they're doing black and pink. But like there is an element, and they would be
the pants with the like singlet top sort of thing.
Yeah, the single top. Yeah. There's a very interesting kind of visual thing that I just picked up when I started. Hey, there's some interesting kind of like lookalikes, and I think Brazos did some of that too. So I don't want to like completely kind of forget that. But I mean, again, looking at it holistically, it's hard not to think of them once you look at it as go like, yeah, obviously, I think these guys probably should be in the Hall, right? And we can kind of cover like Mexico a little bit. I think that's the next thing we have to do.
Yeah. Let me pull up, and I'll put it on my screen here, the Mexico region. While I'm pulling up on the screen here as well, I want to ask you this question: let's go over the Mexico region first. Let me do that first. So the Mexico region, we are going to talk about a little bit here. This is a region that will have two new people, Los Espantos and Colossal Colasetti, which we'll talk about later on another future episode. But there is now going to be 9 acts in this region. 9 acts meaning you get 3 votes here.
So people understand, like I've been advocating and looking into the Lucha territories. I mentioned this at the beginning for a while, and I think that Mexico was deeply underrepresented relative to their importance, and it's hard for. I think I don't know if I mentioned this live on air, but like the way to think about Mexico is Mexico's been drawing arena-sized houses for a century, right? And not just in Distrito Federal, which is like the central part of the capital. They've drawn everywhere in Mexico, and there's vibrant territories like doing stuff everywhere in Mexico, right? And multiple, and and obviously it goes up and down historically, but it's a territory where people are sent to train from other territories so they can learn the style, and it's a very there's a lot of evolution that happens in Mexico, and a lot of what we consider the tropes of wrestling start in Lucha, right? They come from there and kind of analyze and grow from there. And a lot of your favorites historically understood this and worked Mexico, right? Like Hogan worked Mexico, and a lot of the historical guys worked that. And I think that relative to that, I don't think we recognize enough of the people who were key parts. Now, there's a lot of people in the hall, but I think that we're having conversations around people that comparatively, we're having people stick and not get in that comparatively in other territories would have gotten in before. I think Darrell Dixon and Hamada were the last two guys who got in.
Correct.
Are two people that in any other region would have gotten in would have gotten in ages ago. I think Hamada in particular is one guy who's considered so incredibly influential to wrestling across the board everywhere that it was shocking to me that it took him so long. But I think it was part of it was convincing people to vote in the region. Hey guys, you know enough. And I think my mission on the Mexico region has been building up this or translating a lot of this work so that it's available to people so people can make their own judgment on this. Because I do think some of that, the language barrier is an issue, because you'll see a lot of these guys talking about historical stuff and it's in Spanish. And that does become a barrier to people again, there's some real great historical stuff, but it's not necessarily accessible to people. We want to get this more accessible so people kind of know and get more involved in that, right? And I want to be clear that I'm gonna bury some people in terms of should they be a Hall of Famer now? That doesn't mean I don't think they should be a Hall of Famer eventually, right? I want to kind of be clear on that.
So with Grant Hamada and Darrell Dixon going in last year, and obviously Los Infernales, people that we did an episode on last season, Los Infernales with Club Lucha, they fell off the ballot. That leaves us with 9 acts, 3 votes in the region. Those acts are Sangre Chicana, Mascarilla Sangrada, Volador Jr., the tag team of Angel Blanco and Dr. Wagner, Al Dandi, La Parca from the AAA one, not the new AAA one, the older AAA one.
Officially not that.
The second one?
Not the La Parca you're thinking of, yes.
Yeah, I guess it would be La Parca 2 would be.
It's a AAA La Parca. Yeah, I mean. Yeah,
they should maybe change that to La Parca 2 at this point, since there's now a third one in AAA. El Hijo de Santo and Octagon, Los Espantos, who we've talked about, and Colosso Colasetti.
And El Dandy. I believe El Dandy. Yeah,
yes, and El Dandy. I don't know if I've said him or not, but yes, El Dandy.
How dare you disrespect El Dandy?
How did I forget the name El Dandy? Jeez. Okay, Arturo. I asked this everyone. You got 3 votes. Who are you at this point in time in March? Who are you thinking about voting in to the wrestling?
Oh boy, this is like choosing between my own children. But God,
you have a gun to your head. You have to choose.
Gun to my head. I am probably going with Los Espantos.
Ooh,
1.
Not often. By the way, not often do we get people giving the subject of the episode their vote. A lot of people are like, "Oh, there's other people. They're not quite yet on." But I love the boldness of going.
Well, no, I mean, I spent a lot of time researching this,
of course,
and
talking to people, and
I will explain. I will explain why for the different cases. So,
sure,
I'm gonna go with them 1. I'm probably gonna go with Sangre Chicana 2.
Okay.
Because Sangre Chicana, people don't understand how big a draw Sangre Chicana was a huge star in Mexico. He was a gigantic star. He's in that same. The thing with Sangre Chicana is, I'll compare him to Mox in that he's working that style that really the voters don't really like that much, which is that brutish, bloody style. He's a broody brawler, but he drew so much money. And he's such influential. People love Sangre Chicana, and I think he deserves to be in.
Sure.
And then that third vote is where I get into oh my God. Because I'd advocated for both the guys that I'm thinking of. Basically, my third vote would be between Volador Jr. and Mascarita Sagrada. Mascarita Sagrada.
I love.
Here's my argument for Mascarita Sagrada. Mascarita Sagrada is not just a draw and not just initiator for the minis and the greatest mini of all time, but I will argue that Mascarita Sagrada is the forerunner of the modern main event style outside of WWE. Because every heavyweight now, go look at Mascarita Sagrada working like in the 90s, and then watch a Kenny Omega match, right? And I'm completely serious. The style that he's working, a lot of the guys like Ricochet is trying like working styles, like the matches that he would put together. A lot of the stuff that he was doing with the minis is stuff that people stole, and he's deeply influential in the modern style. I can watch, like, he's one of those guys that, like, you watch Mascarita, and then if you're specifically looking for it, you'll see Mascarita all over everything, right? Sure. And then we get to Ballot Jr., who was arguably at one point one of the best workers in the world, right? And he it's like he top 5 and he wasn't 5. And he's also, the thing with Ballot is also he's been involved in this resurgence for CMLL. And honestly, CMLL, like, his case has gotten stronger with CMLL just like being on this insane streak of sellouts. Sure. We're like hugely successful. And he's like, I mean, he's an active wrestler, but he's also considered one of the guys who trains everybody, right? Yeah. And so, like, he's the big influential worker. It's a bit like the Mochizuki case, where, like, yeah, he's the big influential worker for all these guys, and like he's like, this is one of the most successful periods in CMLL history. So how do I rate that? And right now,
gun to your head,
if I had a ballot, I would probably vote for fuck.
Fuck is not an option.
I would probably vote for Mascarita, but you could talk me into Ballot Jr. And the reason I vote for Mascarita is I don't want him to fall off. I know. But really, it's a situation where, like, God, I wish I had a fourth vote. It's the same thing as last year. Like, last year I cut Ballot off and Mascarita, and I was like, God, this sucks. Yeah. And then, okay, so then we get into
which, by the way, I'm not going to be the one that's talking to Ballot Jr. I love Sagrada. And I'm not a
but you understand well, like, if we're talking about the greatest if we're talking about the greatest and most influential workers in the world, right?
Yes.
Like, choosing between Ballot and Mascarita Sagrada is like, why am I having to do this? But the reason, again, like, I'm putting people in who, like, look, Sangre Chicana and Los Espantos need to be in the hall, whereas Ballot and Mascarita should be, right? Sure. Does that make a difference? And I think then we get into, like, then my next act would be Angel Blanco and Dr. Wagner. And again, Dr. Wagner's already in. Angel Blanco really were essentially kind of do that. And I'm not sold on the explanation. Solitario should be in, but then I got into the investigating the whole thing with Espantos and the breakup with Santo, and then I'm like, well, they just did the same thing with Angel Blanco, Dr. Wagner, and Solitario. Yeah. And Solitario and Dr. Wagner are already in, so is Angel Blanco by himself worthwhile? I mean, like, yeah. No, not in comparison to Los Espantos, right?
Sure.
I'm choosing between, like, an important angle and one of the most important angles in the history of wrestling. Well, I'm going to go with Espantos. I got to go with Espantos over La Segunda, La Nueva, La Blanca, right? Really, honestly, between two of them. And then La Parca, the Triple A La Parca, I don't consider a serious candidate. It's like, okay, you're on the ballot. Great for you. El Dandy is a really great worker. Yeah. But I'd put him below Volador and Mascarita in terms of influence, right? Sure, so he'd be third in that one. He's also like a curmudgeonly old fuck. Like, he's very nasty on interview. He doesn't win friends a lot. So it kind of works against him. Like, when he listens to testimonials, he just goes out here and just, like, kills everybody. So he doesn't really work. Like, he's like Bret Hart, but, like, nasty and some of this stuff. So
interesting.
No, seriously, I've listened
to a
lot
of connections between the two.
I've listened to him to his interviews, yeah. I mean, Dandy's, he's worthwhile to be on this ballot because he really was an interesting and really good worker.
Yeah.
But he's not as influential or as good to me as Ballot or Mascarita, and so that makes him down. Hijo and Octagon, and, like, my kayfabe thing is, we love Octagon. Please don't be offended to come after us, please. But as much as they're part of the Gringos Locos feud, and the launch of this era of Mexican wrestling on TV being hot, I mean, Santito's already in. I don't think I can't credibly vote for Hijo de Santo and Octagon. Sure. I mean, they'd be below Angel and Dr. Wagner. And they'd be way below Los Espantos. So, I mean, like, yeah, I can't costly. Colosetti's is an interesting name, but he's kind of, I wish I could put him in historical. And he's more like, I mentioned Archie Goldie because he works that style. He's a trusted hand. He's a guy who he's worthy on being the because he's influential in different regions too, in terms of like being a guy who, but he's not, he's kind of on the mid-carder level, and I don't see anything that would make me want to. I'm happy for him being on the ballot, but I wouldn't push him to be on the to be in the hall per se, right?
Sure.
He's and again, I don't want to say he's a bad candidate, right? I
think anyone on here is typically a good candidate.
I would vote for Colossal Colosetti before voting for La Parca AAA.
Yeah.
To give it, and I probably would. I need to dig into between him and El Dandy, right, to kind of like figure that out.
Sure.
Because I do think, like, I'm surprised. You and I were both surprised, like, how good a worker he was on some of the stuff we've seen on him. So
yes, on Colosetti, yes.
See, he's like Archie Goldie. I mentioned the Archie Goldie comparison. Archie Goldie, I used to bury in Mongolian Archie Goldie until I started watching Archie Goldie matches. Then I was like, oh no, these are like really good. He's way deserving of like an examination. So I think Colossal Colosetti is worthy of being examined as a candidate and having people look into his over. But I don't think he's worthwhile of being in the hall per se. Like good on the ballot, good per se, right? So again, like I'd say I would go Espantos 1, Sangre Chicana 2, and then depending on the day, I'm choosing either Mascarita or Volador. And right now I'm choosing Mascarita. But like if somebody tells me they're voting Volador, I am not judging them. You have every right to vote. Like I was talking to JML when we were doing our pod, and he was voting Volador, and I respect him voting. I understand and respect him voting Volador Jr. Right? Yeah. And he's one of those guys that I think we will look. His candidacy will only get stronger over time because I do think he's a very influential figure in a very important period of wrestling for Mexico. Whereas Mascarita, I think, is a guy who's influential to everybody everywhere wrestling, which is kind of like an interesting thing. Like, again, there's a great documentary I put on Mascarita that I recommend to everyone. The El Mini Más Grande del Mundo. That's actually on the list. And again, like I highly recommend people digging into him because he is such an interesting and cool figure, like Mascarita, right? But again, like so is Chicana. Like I don't want to like bury anybody on top. Like so is Chicana, so are Los Espantos. So everybody in this, I think Mexico to me is one of the most packed sections of the hall. I mean, I think everyone here I can make, except for maybe La Parca, I can make a credible argument for why you could consider them in the Hall of Fame. Right?
It's also an extremely wide open region as well, with Durrell and Gran Hamada both getting over 70% last year on the last year's ballot. There is a plethora of votes available to all of these people. That is just a matter of, okay, how do things shake out? Is anyone going to go in, from Mexico this year? Probably not. I think it all comes down to how is it all going to shake out.
Everything could consolidate around Chicana and Volador Jr. I think Chicana has a lot of respect, and it's earned respect, and I could see the vote just breaking towards Chicana, and I would not be mad at all for him to, because again, you have to understand, when you ask people, Chicana's the kind of guy that a lot of Lucha fans will say, who's your favorite? Chicana, right? My broadcast partner, who's your favorite? Chicana. And this is a guy who's deep into the LA scene. He's like, but no. And Chicana is his guy. Yeah. And I understand that, and I could see it consolidating around that. But then it gets I'm making the argument, as I said, when I dug into the Espantos, I was not expecting to come out of this exercise as no, Espantos are but yeah, I mean, I went through it and we're I can reasonably make the argument that, yeah, they are. And that was not my expectation on this. But as I said, there isn't anybody in the region. It's a very, I would say there's at least 2 candidates for every slot in this region, right? Yeah. Which I don't think is the case for any other region, right? I don't think any of the other regions have this deep a bench right now for the slots that are being contested, right? I think Japan is 4, right? Is Japan 4 votes this year?
I want to say that's yes. 4 votes. No, that's rest of the world. Where's Japan? 5 votes.
Well, I would, again, and if I were voting Japan, I would deeply think about maybe not voting for. I might be like top 4 and I'm good. Like I don't need, like I've said, like, because I don't necessarily think that the people who are I don't necessarily think the right people are on the ballot, and I also don't necessarily think that like you can justify like 5 slots at this point from the people that are going in, because I do think Japan has been in a kind of like conveyor belt mode, getting a lot of people in, right? So I think they've cleared all of the major, like essentially, like I would be deeply considering Takayama as a vote if I was voting in Japan, right? And I've argued against him before, but I'd be like, no, you know what? Like with some of the examination, with some of the people that are in, and some of the drawing that he did later in career, I would consider it, right? So I think that, but like the idea that I could get 10 deep in Japan is kind of crazy with that level of candidate. Or like imagine getting 14 deep in historical. Like no, that would be kind of like
Japan has sort of a similar issue that historical has, less so than historical, but I think it's just that like we've gotten to this point that a lot of the major stars are in at this point, so it's just a matter of like, not, these aren't fringe cases, but these are people that like have a little bit in some, not overall overwhelmingly great, maybe, and maybe just in one, maybe not in two. And it's like historical has a similar thing where it's just like all the big names are in at this point, and we're just kind of looking at who's on the outskirts.
Yeah, they flawed, not clean candidates. Because, like, for example, like if you ask me who my top Japan candidate, I'm going to start with Taijutsu Singh, and that's going to piss off people because they're like, oh, he's such a terrible worker. But I'm like, okay, sure. Even if I rate him as a 1 on work, but everything else, like in terms of his significance and in terms of drawing, he might be the most significant and the most and the biggest draw left on the ballot right now. It's kind of crazy. Like if you think about like the level of drawing he was doing everywhere and who he was working against and kind of like the tropes he started, then I mean, like, but again, he's a flawed candidate. Like I don't disagree he's a flawed candidate. So like essentially that's a lot of that. Whereas I think Mexico, there's a lot of candidates in Mexico that are strong in everything, right? And then we're picking against like, it's a deep bench. And I think that probably the card could afford to be more broadened. I mentioned we talked about Ruben Juarez, we talked about him and Garza as a tag team. And then like I'd have to like look and see who's in and who's not. The Satánico, like those Infernales fell off, and I don't know that the Infernales should necessarily fallen off. I think they were just, and again, the problem was like it was such a logjam at the top that like some of it, what people have to understand is the number of candidates plays a role into how deep you can stay. I think like to look at modern, we get these weak candidates getting at it at the back end. Seth God, don't get me started on Seth Rollins, but like they're getting at it back in because that allows for more people to stay on the ballot in a way, kind of. And I think that that's kind of key. And again, I suggest people spend the time with the Mexican candidates. And the reason I try to put together these reference guides so people can spend the time, and I do think it's fascinating because we do get some really fascinating historical like oral histories, and these are fascinating characters, right? Like you can't go wrong. Let's look at old El Dandy matches. You can't go wrong with that. Like we were arguing, like we were talking about before. There's a great Colosetti, El Dandy, and Misawa as a young boy match out of like CML that's out there, and God, these things are just so great. Or like looking at like I mentioned El Dandy's not like good one, like, or like finding stuff from Ballot or from his Golden Era, or like again Mascarita or like Sangre Chicana. All these guys have these, or like if you've never seen the Gringos Locos feud with Santo and Octagon, go ahead and look at that and like how important and how interesting these are. It's like like this is really good stuff you can see, and you will appreciate if you're somebody listening to this, you will appreciate this kind of match, I suspect, right? I mean, I think that's like, and again, I thank you because I probably would have gone into like Espantos as deep as I did for this, but it would have taken me a while to get to where I'm at with them if I had not been required to prep for this episode, right? So like I was like, oh, I mean, I knew enough, but I was like, let me do a deep dive on this case and look at like the history, and it got me really into the history of Lucha because again,
Yeah.
they're intrinsically linked to El Santo. They're intrinsically linked to Mil Máscaras. They're linked to Blue Demon. They're linked to this golden period of Mexican Lucha, and you have there. Like I think one of the things that I use a test for the Hall of Fame is what happens if I erase them, right? Can I tell the story? I think David said it. If can I tell the story
Yes.
without them?
I've talked about it on the show before. When we're talking about historical significance, sometimes I tell people is that you're looking at the canon of pro wrestling. Like if you're writing a book about the history of lucha libre or even wrestling in general.
I can't not tell the story of Los Espantos because I have to tell the story of Santo, right?
Yeah.
So how do I tell the story without like his second most important match? I can't.
Like they're obviously look, our Espanto like the Santo slot, like they're the main character, not necessarily, but they're the main antagonists. Of
right.
Like
it's I can't tell the story of Hogan without Paul Orndorff, right? It's the same kind of like deal. And like a good example, and I'll talk about Monet again because Monet is one of my cases, which is like how does women's wrestling in the U.S. look like if I don't have Monet, right?
Yeah.
Who's really the best worker of that group? If I take her out and she's really good at making people look good, it looks way different without her, right?
Yeah.
Is it like, and again, some of these people are really important. And again, could I possibly replace them and get somebody else in that slot? Maybe I could have gotten Ola Blanca in that slot, but we don't know that. And we don't know that they necessarily, the proof isn't in them as drawing at that level for that length of time as a trios, right? So, right, this is where you come to, right? You have to judge on what we have. And
what we have is pretty good.
what we have is pretty good. I can justify. I would say, look, I'm going to put them on top of my ballot, on my top of my hypothetical ballot for Mexico. When I do the discussion and do the analysis, I'd say, hey, these are the guys that I would start with, right? And then as I said, I would go to Sangre because, again, looking at history, I've seen enough like old heads going like just drooling about Sangre. I understand that because I understand that like that he's well respected as kind of that person. And then like again, we start getting into like cases that again like should be Hall of Famers, but I don't necessarily want them in yet. But again, like if we're talking about, I think we've mentioned like some of the wording like ballot worthy, right? And I think that Mexico has a good percentage of ballot worthy candidates that I have no problem having a conversation around these guys.
Yeah.
And I say this, I think one of the things I judge, right, when I start a conversation around the Hall of Fame, whether I want to spend time talking about a candidate is my consideration as to whether or not a candidate is ballot worthy, which gets me into trouble sometimes because I'll be like, I'm willing to have a conversation around Trish Stratus, right? I don't think she's a Hall of Famer, but I am willing to have the conversation. I am willing to listen to the female wrestlers who cite her as an influence and say, yeah, she was there and she was like what I was looking at. Like, and do I agree no, but I am willing to listen to the people who are in that space who want to talk about her. And I think people wanting to talk about that person, right, is kind of a marker to me of, we should be considering this person to the Hall, or we shouldn't, because nobody's having conversation around this person. And like, I think that's kind of, it goes a little bit to the example where they call in the Baseball Hall of Fame, what they call black ink and gray ink, which is like people having conversations and like rating them and putting them in positions is an important marker of kind of the start of the case, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, I think that's sort of the secret sauce of the show a little bit is that because we are talking about newer cases, or in the case of last episode, Booker T, a returning case, that it is this show that is it's profiles of Hall of Fame careers. You're going to bring up people that like no one's ever heard of, like La Petite France. Pretty much like it's these sort of like cards that fill out your Google sheet quite nicely of the Hall of Fame reference stuff. But it's also this thing of like, it is, look, do I think every single person on this ballot in all these regions are ballot worthy? No, there's a couple of people that wouldn't say ballot worthy, but there is, at the end of the day, the guy, the preeminent historian on not Lucha Libre, but professional wrestling, believes in some regard, or at least has been told in some regard, that probably every single one of these people, I would say that Dave thinks is some capacity ballot worthy. Part of this show is figuring out what that is. It is figuring out what the case is of this person. And then it's the conversation of, is the case good? Like, is it bad? Like last episode of the case, what is the actual case of Booker T? And our conclusion was, he's not a Hall of Famer. What are we doing here? You know, it's.
I mean, I think I will defend Booker T a little bit because I do think.
I know.
I think he's.
I know people were clamoring for more Booker T talk, and here we are. I'm joking.
Well, no. Here's the thing. Like, I as a fan and as considering the eras and considering where he's working, what he was doing,
sure,
him being part of a really important tag team and a really over tag team at the time. And him being kind of part of a main event scene in a very white environment, right? That's an era where, like, I think it is worthwhile to have the conversation about. He's ballot worthy. He's more ballot worthy to me than Seth Rollins, right? I can make a much more valid argument for him as a singles candidate than Seth Rollins. Seth, I believe, should eventually get in with the Shield, but that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah,
but effectively, I think that, like, it's. You know, I can understand why you would argue historical significance for him, right? Mm-hmm. But he's a little bit like, I mean, if we're talking in the Mexico ballot, like bringing it back to, like, he's a little bit like El Dandy. We're like, I mean, when I did out El Dandy, like, I'm fine having the conversation around El Dandy. I'm not going to advocate for him being in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with, like, Booker is like, I could never see myself voting for Booker T, but I could never see myself being mad that he's on the ballot. Right? Yeah. There's been way worse candidates on the modern ballot. So I'm like, no, he's fine. Like, there's no like all due respect, Asuka was a worse candidate than Booker T, right? Mm-hmm. For the modern region, right? Mm-hmm. And I love Asuka as a worker in Japan, but why? And I understand but like, I think that, like, and she does have some historical significance for being, like, the first Japanese women being pushed to that level in the US. But I do think what Booker T was more significant than her, and he had more success demonstrably on top. Yep. As a drawing concern in the U.S., where I can say, hey, I mean,
there's something here, yeah, and that's what it is, and that's, you know, going
like,
back
he's not a laughable candidate by any means. It's like that's the point I would make on him. Is he a candidate that no? I mean, he's a serious candidate, no, but he's not a laughable to be on the ballot. Ballot worthy versus Hall of Fame worthy.
Sure. And
we were arguing about a case that was, like, both Hall of Fame worthy and ballot worthy. Like, so I mean, it's very different.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's partly the conceit of the show.
I think to break it to the Espantos, if we were talking about Espanto 3, I don't know that Espanto 3 by himself would be ballot worthy. I think Espanto 2 might be on the cusp. I think Espanto 1 would be both ballot worthy, and I would probably consider him for the Hall, but necessarily see, like, if it was
I would have to think about that one.
If it was just Espanto 1, I'd put him behind. I would put him. He wouldn't be ahead of Chicana. Yeah. But I would have a conversation about which two of the three am I voting? If it's Espanto 1, Mascarita Sagrada, and Volador, I'd have a conversation. Probably go with Espanto 1 because, again, the Santo feud and like him being the Miss Mill feud. As an act, when you bring in all the trio significance, that puts him over, right?
I wonder if, like, the original pitch was Espanto 1, and then it became a little bit of like, well, then why don't we just consider all? Well, it's like, why not consider all three of them, because all three of them gets you that historical significance edge.
Ethan was the one to suggest it to Dave, and he suggested it is as the act, right? So
well, I wonder if that was. That's what I'm saying.
No, because I said to him, should it have been Espanto 1? Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, make it the trios. Perfect. And I thought he was, and like, Ethan, to all respect, I thought you were wrong, but, like, going through this, I came to the same space and said, like, no, I think it's more reasonable to put him in as the act, because I do think, here's the thing, from a historical perspective, for Mexico, right, for Lucha, the trope namer, the original trios is important to be in the Hall. I think that's kind of, that makes sense, right? It's kind of like, I think, a little bit of the Mascarita argument. For Lucha, the most important mini should be in the Hall, because...
And not even just Lucha, but, like, minis globally.
Right, but he's the most important mini like, and I think, yeah, I mean, like being the pioneer of trios in Lucha as a drawing concern is it's a big deal. It's a big, so yeah, I mean, like ultimately I came around to the conclusion, like, yeah, you color it, they didn't distinguish the act because, like, if you, as I said, like the Santos match, Espantos 3 is in the ring at the end and he's involved in the finish. So effectively, like, and Espanto 1 is involved in the finish of the Espanto 2 match. So like, they're an act, right? And I think the idea of the act, the trios act in Mexico, becomes a thing with them, and I think that's an important distinction to have on the ballot, and that puts me over the top with them, saying, like, yes, we should enshrine the first big money drawing act, who is like a big part of Santos' career, because I do think that matters. If you told me it was the first trios act I wouldn't give the Freebirds extra credit for being like the first big trios act in the U.S., right? I mean, they're the Freebirds. There are other reasons, but I do think that as an important part of wrestling in Mexico, trios are that, because they do become kind of like the big thing for a long time, like 70s and 80s. They're like, I mean, like it's still now. I mean, like, I mean, they're working close to the top of the card a lot of the nights when we see these CMLL shows, which, I mean, I'm a regular CMLL watchers. They're like, yeah, like Jinetes del Aire, like they're working on top, man. Sky Team, they're working on top, right? And it is a thing where like somebody had to make it a money drawing concern, and so it is important to put them in like that. But again, like if we were drawing to that, Espanto Uno would probably eventually get my vote for the Hall of Fame as a singles. But I understand that, like, yeah, this is the Kawada versus the Holy Demon Army argument. But like, I'd be a yes on both. Yeah. But like, yes, one doesn't stop me from the other, right?
That's perfect.
Rehashing old arguments, but yes.
Arturo, thank you so much for coming on. Classic moment to end all podcasts. Let's open up the plug bag. Arturo, where can people find you?
I'm easiest way to find me is I'm American Numbers on Twitter. I'm also doing the Prescription as a pod, where we do a lot of discussion about, we'll do state wrestling stuff, which is like regular. We'll have BJ Bethel on with us, who's also really good. We'll do a lot of discussion on news. And then we're doing a lot of series around like historical on different stuff. We do Joshi stuff. We do Puerto Rico, a lot of Puerto Rico. We do a lot of Lucha stuff. We do a lot of stuff around LA, which I consider one of the great hidden territories that people don't really know about, but it's really influential. And just generally we try to have like slightly different discussions and slightly longer form discussions around things that we like around wrestling. So, hey, if you don't like one of our episodes, go look for another one. Hopefully, like, it'll be like down your alley.
Yeah, highly recommend. Go check that out. Arturo, again, thank you so much for coming on to the show. Thank you everybody for listening. Subscribe to the podcast, all that stuff. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns regarding this episode of The Ballot or anything about the case of the Los Espantos, give us a call, drop us a line, 9495-BALLOT. That is 949-522-5568. Arturo's wife is calling that phone number right now. That is it for this month's episode, a second bonus episode, I guess, of The Ballot. We'll be back next month talking a whole new case with more than likely a whole new first-time guest. I think last episode I said that there's going to be the next two are going to be the next first-timers. I think it's actually going to be three. You, Arturo, someone else next one, and then someone else. Actually, no. I think it's going to be all new people for the rest of the year. Now
it is fun. It is funny that one of your upcoming episodes was a very much a not it kind of scenario. Everybody's going not it on this one, but like, yeah, I think I'm very interested to listen to this next episode.
Yes, I'm going. Look. There's some tough bookings I have to do that I think getting people to do this show. It's not getting people to do the show. It's getting people to saying
somebody has to like act their age and take a fall, being a little bit spoilery.
Sure. Well, we'll find out. We'll find out. Well, thank you everybody for listening to this month's episode of The Ballot. We'll be back next month talking about a whole new case, a whole new conversation for the first time. Thank you everybody. Thank you, Arturo. We'll talk to you later. Goodbye, everybody. The Ballot Podcast was recorded and produced by myself, Ryan Knightsey, as part of the Count Out Wrestling Podcast Network. Please rate, subscribe, and most importantly, review the show wherever podcasts are found. If you would like to leave a comment, question, or reaction to an episode, please drop us a line at 9495-BALLOT or 949-522-5568. Otherwise, you can contact us at countoutnetwork@gmail.com. Have a good day, and we'll talk to you next time on The Ballot. This has been a Count Out Podcast.